All right, having a quorum present, I'll call to order the Wednesday, June 1st, 2016 meeting of the Historic Landmarks Commission. First item on the agenda is public comment. Any member of the public may address the Historic Landmarks Commission for up to 2 minutes on any subject that is not on our agenda today. I do have one speaker slip. Ms. Lodge, if you would please come forward, and you have the floor. Oops. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. A couple of times I've referred to Casa de las Fuentes when you have been looking at AUD projects in particular. And since I happen to have a bunch of photographs of Casa de las Fuentes, I thought I would print them up to help refresh your memories, to show you what can be done. These are 57 units to the acre. Now, they are smaller average unit size than the projects that are coming before you, but still, and it's 3 stories in 35 feet. That's from the corner of, looking at it from Castillo and Carrillo. Yeah. This is from Carrillo.
About the second floor up there.
Yeah. Castillo, the third floor is set back, so you can't see it. Mm-hmm. This is the roof deck.
Mm-hmm. It could be up for sale.
I think that's upstairs, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. It's up. It's on the second floor, or third floor. Yeah, it's the third floor roof deck. And then this is the corner, and I just think it's such a beautiful example of what I understand we're looking for in El Pueblo Viejo, and it certainly says Santa Barbara, and it is high density. Mm-hmm. So, just an example.
Okay.
And you may.
We'll hold on to these.
Okay.
All right.
Here's a clip for them if you wish.
Thank you for that, Ms. Lodge.
Thank you. You're welcome.
No more public comments. I'll close public comment and go to the minutes of the meeting. The consent cap. No, the minutes of May 18th. Do I have a motion to approve the? I have a motion by Mahan, second by Schallenberger. Under discussion, are there any additions, corrections, clarifications? Anyone? None? Then I'll ask for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain.
Abstain for item 1.
Okay, we have one abstention, Schallenberger, from item 1. The motion was made by Mahan, seconded by Schallenberger. All right, next on the agenda is the consent calendar. Mr. Eng.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The consent calendar for today, June 1st, 2016, is as follows. Item A, 202 State Street. This project received approval of the review after final as submitted. Item B, 2535 Anacapa Street. This project was postponed indefinitely at the applicant's request. And lastly, item C, 227 East Anapamu Street. This project received project design approval and final approval as submitted. Items A and C were reviewed by Commissioner Mahan.
Okay, do I have a motion to ratify the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Lavoie, second by Schallenberger. Under discussion, is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Thank you, Commissioner Mahan, for reviewing the consent calendar. Next is announcements. Any requests by applicants for continuances, withdrawals, anything on City Council, Planning Commission, Parks and Recreation agendas that we should be aware of? Mr. A?
Nothing to report on those fronts. I do want to mention that Commissioner Murray will be absent from today's meeting,
okay,
and Commissioner Drury will be arriving a little later, probably around 3.
Okay. Mr. Lamont?
Yes, I just did want to update the commission that we do have a project scheduled at the Planning Commission. It was a referred project, 1032 Santa Barbara Street. So we'll ask a commissioner to represent this commission regarding that project when it goes to the Planning Commission for comments only.
Do we know when that's going to play?
July 7th.
We got some time.
Yes, I just want to give a heads up.
1032 Santa Barbara Street.
1032.
1032 Santa Barbara Street. Are they coming back before us before they go to Planning Commission? No? Okay. All right. Any other announcements? Commissioners? No? Subcommittee reports. Did anybody attend any subcommittees in the last 2 weeks? No? All right. Moving right along then. We have a discussion item from Mr. Jaime Limon, status report on the Historic Preservation 5-year work program. Mr. Limon.
Good afternoon. Jaime Limon, Senior Planner. Today, I'm happy to come to you to give you an update on our 5-year work plan program for historic preservation. This was at the behest of one of our commissioners who felt it was necessary to also give the commission an update. We do this regularly with the Planning Commission and Council. We did that in March, I believe, this year. And what I wanted to do is give you some more information because it was sort of a multi-topic discussion there. And this commission should be up to date on all the goings-on that staff is working on. So I'm making the presentation, but I also want to point out that this is a team effort. We have our historian who works very closely with me, and she's been very productive over the last 3 years. And you're going to point to some issues that she directly worked on, and so we're very happy to report progress on multi-fronts.
Does she get a raise?
Every year she gets a raise. She's actually had an anniversary recently, right? Fourth year.
Oh,
So we've seen some productivity since she's been on.
Congratulations.
So I'd like to kick off the first item by giving you some background on our program. If you can start the presentation. Just the fact that in 2012, after a lot of effort, we had the historic resource element developed and adopted by council, and there were 47 implementation items that to be considered as part of that document. And given the fact that we wanted to focus in on the high priority items, we narrowed it down to 7 or 8 items, and I'll go through those items. But those priority items were presented to the Historic Landmarks Commission in January of 2013, and you confirmed and supported that approach for this 5-year plan. And that plan actually went to City Council in February and was adopted by Council. And so we provided Council and Planning Commission these updates twice a year. Our city planner makes those presentations and gives a status update on those work efforts. And that was done again in March. But we also have P3 goals as part of our annual reporting mechanisms, and our preservation work program is part of that. So we have to report on where we are on those efforts and whether we're reaching some milestones with respect to our program. Next. So these are the major work items that were singled out and consisting of guidelines, mapping and flagging parcels near sensitivity areas, completion of the surveys, DPR forms, which Nicole has been working with interns on for the last 3 or 4 years, creating an online historic database, potential list updates, asking that we incorporate and follow through on designations more regularly, and then we're dealing with also ordinance provisions that we'd like to incorporate into our existing historic structures ordinance that would simplify and provide more additional flexibility in regulations. And finally, the historic districts implementation, as you know, that's been a very top priority for us. Next. So with respect to historic resource design guidelines, as you know, we've completed the draft and it's ready for council adoption as of November when it was presented. And what we believe is that should be a companion document to the historic districting. So we're holding off on hoping that we'll have an ordinance soon that we can go up to council and have them both adopted at the same time. And as part of those guidelines, as you know, there's a lot of direction to property owners on how to do the right thing with respect to historic resources. And the COA has developed assessment and analysis tools and procedures to work with property owners. It's really helpful when you have a guide and you can explain to folks clearly what it takes to get a project approved. And a lot of the projects, as you know, can be minor. And we're hoping that the guidelines serve that tool as a tool to get these minor projects done correctly. So we'll encourage property owners to come forward. Next. And as you know, a part of that was with the first creation of our Architectural Styles Guide. What's exciting now is that we're actually creating some video clips for the purposes of training and educational purposes. We're not going to show you those preview clips today, but Nicole's going to follow up on that. And what it is essentially a style clip for every style that we've included in our styles guide.
How many styles did you come up with?
23?
Not that many.
No, 13.
13, and Commissioner Grumbine was a big part of that, so we've indicated that Harrison Design Associates, again, helped us get those developed. We're very appreciative of the fact that that firm came step forward.
I would like to say on behalf of the Commission, thank you very much to Harrison Design Associates in particular, Anthony Grumbine. That was very helpful.
And you'll see in these video clips, those come to life.
Yeah.
Okay, next. Now, parcel tax, historic sensitivity. I wanted to point out to you that we have been busily mapping. Timothy Bolton here, our planning tech guru, is mapping things for us. And what he's done
GIS expert.
Yes. Is
Do we want to do the overhead?
Identified where all our resources are in the city, and we'll have some mapping for you. It'll be blown up later, so it'll be more clear. Also listing each resource and developing sensitivity areas around the resource. So I just wanted to point out we have a map, and it's all on GIS. Next. We don't really need to have this yet. Just wanted to show it's mapped.
So the sensitivity area is the lighter color?
Yeah, there it is, right
Okay.
here. As you can see, let's have Timmy blow it up. We'll see it. It's already minimized. Down the bottom, there you go.
Well, there goes your guru status. Just kidding.
Okay, so you can see the designated structures of merit are orange and the landmarks are purple. And then when he flips on the layers, you see how there's a purple shading and orange shading around each resource. So what we've done is developed a 50-foot distance around those resources to identify parcels that may propose development, and therefore they'll be aware that there's an adjacent historic resource in close proximity, and we can advise them to take caution and to make sure they develop a project that's compatible with that resource. We also have expanded that distance to 100 feet for properties that are National Register or eligible. And we also have the green that denotes that there is a landscape feature on those properties that we need to look at. So those are the way they're mapped, and hopefully that'll help.
You've got. It looks like you've got all the trees as well. The historic trees, specimen trees.
Yeah, and the ones that have been designated. So there's still some adjustments. Some of the parcels have one tree, and whether it's fair to label the entire parcel as a sensitivity area, that at least we'll
At least it's
know
identified there.
Exactly.
That's helpful.
And the trees along it. Our little graphics there. You did create a tree graphic. Next slide. Fall forward. So surveys. As you know, we had a lot of work effort and contracts to complete the waterfront survey and the Lower Riviera survey. Those records needed updating, and Nicole did, in fact, work with one of our interns to make sure that all the DPR forms were complete, the data and significant statements were all correct, and that was very necessary in order for us to proceed to our next step, which is online historic database. Because what good is the information if it's not correct and available for the public? And we have, in fact, had a contract awarded as of 2015 to do a website enhancement. Civica, the same website provider that is online now, will be scheduled to have it hopefully online very soon. We're doing some testing underway. But the whole point of it is we'll have the ability to pull up 2,800 parcels or property records accessible for public viewing. So every record that we have that's a survey, we will be able to have access to as well as the public.
That's exciting.
We also have the mechanism in place to add digital documents to parcel records. And what we mean by that is we have files for every landmark. We have files for every historic structures report that was ever received and reviewed by this commission. So the ideal is to put all that historic information online, accessible by address and parcel number, so folks can look up and learn history.
Archaeology reports will not be
No.
online.
No, those are sensitive,
Yeah.
so we're just focusing on the historic structures report. So we're very excited about that. Hopefully, again, soon we'll have a presentation that it'll be functional and you'll see it.
Great.
We'll come forward for that.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, we're very happy about that. And city did step forward and it was able to allocate about $30,000 funds, right, Renee, to pay for that enhancement. So we're very happy about that. Finally got that.
Probably money well spent.
Okay, next. And then the eventual, what we would like to do is obviously survey the entire city and identify all our resources, but we have done some listings concentrated in the historic district, potential historic district areas, and you can see we were very intensive in those efforts as a result of finishing off the surveys that were there, completed 2013, 2014. Those are all mostly tied to potential districts and individual properties that were identified as part of those efforts. And as you know, now it's more selective. In the last 2 years, it's been the ones that are coming in and we identify and that we list. So that's not as regular, but we anticipate more survey efforts coming, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in the future. But again, what we're really focused on in the future are these historic districts. We've only been able to designate one since 2013 because we've been waiting for a process and procedures to be put in place with our ordinance amendments.
I think it's important, though, to mention that prior to 2013, there was at least one that I know of, the Riviera Park, that was a historic district, and so it's a little bit of a skewed status or statistic
Right.
there.
And
There's
you
more than just
understand
one.
that the districting is a lot easier when you're involving one property owner. And that's what happened with the last two. So when you're involving multiple property owners, we're going to have more effort needed because you have a lot more property owners who want to know that their rights are being protected and there's a process in place to allow them to come forward and discuss whether the merits of the designation of the district. So that we're hoping that will be developed very soon.
Good.
Next. And one of the efforts that we're focusing on is to try to simplify and reorganize. We've already had some discussions with our city attorney, and there is a belief that we could simplify the ordinance by creating separate chapters to dealing with, for example, what happens in El Pueblo Viejo, what happens to historic resources, and how we designate resources. And I think that'll be more helpful for the public to define our regulations. Some folks believe our regulations are very difficult to understand, and we're hoping that we'll do that. And there's also a current effort going on, as you know, the ENZO project. We have asked them to consider specific zoning modification findings for historic resources. There's flexibility that can be allowed for historic resources to allow non-conforming uses and possible parking exemptions or lessening of those parking requirements to not as ruin the context of a site by placing a lot of pavement onto a property to meet those parking requirements. So we're hoping to have those discussions as part of that ordinance update. Next. And finally, again, historic districting. A lot of questions still unresolved, specifically on where these processes and procedures should be placed. We have administrative regulations that were adopted by council when we did the demolition review ordinance, and there's a lot of information there about how we list properties. So there's discussions going on, and we'll have those discussions at the ordinance committee on where do we have these rules? Are they actually written in the ordinance, or are they administrative regulations that are explained to the public in that manner? So we'll have those discussions soon. And then we're dealing with special design districts. How do we deal with El Pueblo Viejo? There's some desire to have it be called a special design district, and the real historic districts are really contained within El Pueblo Viejo, like the Brinkerhof. We'd like to call that a historic district rather than a landmark district. We want to clarify what the Lower Riviera Special Design District will be now. Right now, we have essentially a interim district because at the time when it was developed, I think Mr. Rochon's here, helped us develop guidelines for that area and helped us identify those properties. And about 300 properties are part of that. And we know that only about 100 are within a district. So how do we treat those buffering properties? That will be part of the discussion at the ordinance committee. We also have Rosemary Lane, where we have half the street that has historic resources and the other half does not. Do we only designate the 4 or 5 homes, the Moody cottages? Or do we also protect the streetscape by requiring design review for the homes across the street? We believe that might be the best way to preserve the character of the street, or else one side would be regulated and the other side would not. So that's something we're going to be discussing with the ordinance committee also. And finally, I wanted to give you an overall, the program status looks pretty good. A lot of completed items we're very happy to report, and the other ones are underway to some degree. We feel the historic database will be completed soon, so we're really dealing with ordinances. And hopefully within the next 2 years, we'll have them completed and we'll be on track and report to you that our 5-year program is complete and we're ready for our next 5-year program. They may not be here for that.
So we're scheduled, or it's scheduled to go to the ordinance committee.
I apologize, yes, for June 21st.
This month.
Yeah, and that'll be just more of an outline discussion about...
Sort of an introduction.
Well, it's been 3 years, and
Yeah,
so we
yeah.
may have to update them
Yeah.
on what happened 3 years ago and what the direction was, which was try to create an outline, and what will that outline look like, and make sure we get them to buy off on that approach so we don't spend a lot of time and they sort of reject it and say, well, that's not what we envisioned.
Right.
And you'll have an opportunity when we actually have an ordinance to weigh in on it also, so it's not like we're not presenting something that really hasn't been fully fleshed out yet.
It's important for the ordinance committee to be up to speed and
give us price direction.
Yeah.
And this is how we'd like
Yeah.
the ordinance drafted.
could be shut down.
Okay, next slide. So I wanted to include this because this is a pending issue that we also are dealing with, the fact that we have 12 contracts now. 12 contracts were approved by this commission, and they've been successful. We have some additional information now on exactly the type of savings that these property owners are being able to save and redirect towards improvements on the property. And so we expect that to be very popular when the historic districting part of it comes up. It'll be a good incentive for folks to be designated. But with that goes hand in hand the monitoring compliance. You know, there's our 10-year work programs. So Nicole's going to be very busy. She just did her first monitoring of a 5-year, after 5 years, to see if the property is in fact doing what they said they would be doing. And so as you get more contracts, there's more need to monitor and make sure people are doing what they said they were going to be doing. So I wanted to point that out. And then in order to encourage more folks to become aware of the program, Nicole has prepared a nice polished brochure as a handout for folks to also understand what the program's all about. So that's happening. And finally, designation of historic districts is our priority one right now, to get those, hopefully an ordinance in place and work on that. But we are thinking about more historic surveys in specific areas of the city. As you know, we do have survey areas that we have not begun for the entire west side, parts of the east side, Upper Riviera, San Roque. Those are areas that we're going to have to look at how do we do those surveys. And that's what I wanted to share with you today, because those surveys are quite expensive if we do a very intensive level survey. And so what we've had is a mapping of all the structures in the city based on the age of the structure. And so it gives us an indication of what's before 1900 by the purple, magenta color. The orange is 1900 to 1924. The yellow is 1925 to 1944. If we focus on those colors, we can see the concentration of older homes that exist in the city, and where we probably would like to focus in our attention to how to survey block by block and protect specific blocks that are intact and have a high degree of integrity, hopefully. If we know where they are, we can focus in and figure out if we need to list them, identify them, designate them, and try to protect those streetscapes. And maybe find some more historic districts. So I'm asking Nicole, as she considers evaluating properties, to look at how that development has occurred on that block and trying to focus on areas rather than try to cherry pick all these properties, to try to actually preserve specific blocks of the city that still have their charm. And hopefully that'll be our next approach, to give you a plan on how we're going to do that next future.
I assume that the software that created this map will update the colors based on the decades that passed.
Well, yeah, they're periods, they're eras
Right.
that we will do. And right now, as you can see, there's still some gray areas that we need to fill in and try to zero in on whether they are parking lots or they actually have structures or things that we
Right.
care about with respect to age. But as you can see, the
Well, you start to see patterns.
patterns. We're looking at San
Yeah.
Roque area right now,
Yeah.
and I know Nicole's been out and done some surveys out there to see if we can identify certain blocks. But this is sort of the wave of the future, and hopefully, again, we'll have a different program on how do we, when we finish this wave of designations and districts, we'll have another one in place so we can go forward with more surveys, and you'll be a part of that.
It's exciting.
That concludes our presentation. Do
Great.
you have any
Thank you.
questions?
Anyone have any questions?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Drury?
I apologize for being late. Will those maps be available in smaller formats for a certain cost, I guess?
Yeah, there's a certain point where it becomes illegible, but obviously, once we have them more developed, they'll be available at the city, and you could possibly purchase them if they're for
Yeah,
a price.
that'd be great.
Again, it's more of a working document for our benefit to try to track where older developments exist in the city. And also, there's still some verification of data that's still necessary for this mapping to go public. But again, it's just the type of information we have at hand. And those layers now are available, the ones that we showed, the sensitivity areas. So the public will have access to those sensitivity areas and see where the designated resources are. We also have one last layer that we haven't shown you, is the potential list layer. And the potential list properties and where they're at will be also available for folks.
I'm going to actually stop questions, and I've got a late request to speak from Mr. Callum DeForest. Mr. DeForest, public comment is open.
Yes, thank you very much, Jaime and Nicole and everybody for moving forward on this. It's wonderful. It'll be a great help in preserving Santa Barbara's historic structures, which we, of course, the Pearl Chase Society and I am most interested in. When is there any estimated time when this material might be available online? Is question number one. And question number two, is there any, will this help people, developers who want AUD projects next to historic or adjacent to historic structures to not put them there? Thank you.
If I could answer the two questions. First of all, as I said to you, that the GIS layers for the sensitivities will be available to the public, if not already. I've asked that be available. Staff has access to all this information, so obviously when a developer comes forward, we will hopefully identify this as a possible concern or area of sensitivity when they come and propose.
Okay.
We traditionally look up parcel tag information for folks.
Okay, I think you've answered this question. Thank you. I'll close public comment and go back to the commission to see if they have any questions. Commissioner Arias, please.
It would be helpful if the maps were put up in a location where we could see them on occasion. I think that would be very helpful. And I know that getting the districts done is very, very critical, and there's been lots of questions directed at me as to why they have not been completed, and I would urge that happen as soon as possible.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Just a quick
Mr. Schallenberger?
question on the structure age map. It looks like there are a few schools in particular that have the designation as unclear or incomplete. Is that just because so much has happened over time with all of those? I mean, City College, for example, we know the history of that very well, but I assume because it's so mixed on that parcel.
Right.
Is that
That is one of the dilemmas when you're dealing with multiple buildings on parcels.
Right.
You'll have different age of structures, and so do we color the entire structure, the entire parcels? We actually have also building overlays that can identify buildings, but again, it takes a larger map.
Right.
So the answer to your question about how we look at these is it's sort of a process of elimination. We're focusing on private properties now. We've looked at some city schools. There are probably institutional, federal, and county buildings that we don't really have purview over that we'll eventually try to identify them the best we can. I know we've customized some things already where we have a large parcel along the waterfront, and we don't want to identify the entire waterfront as historic, so we'll try to identify one part of the parcel or the building that needs to be protected. So we'll continue to work on this.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Rios?
point of information, the revised edition of El Pueblo Viejo is now intended to be available just before Christmas. They have entered into a contract with Cal Poly, and that the city has committed itself to get a large number of books to assist the staff in making landmark decisions. And so hopefully that, combined with this, will make historic preservation far more easier in the city.
Great. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Limon. Thank you, the rest of staff, particularly Nicole Hernandez. Very much appreciated. All the hard work. If I missed anybody, I apologize. All right, the next item on the agenda is item 2. It's concept review continued for 2559 Puesta del Sol. This is project design approval being requested. The project must comply with City Council Resolution number 15-029 adopted on March 24th, 2015. Phase 1 without the right-of-way improvements was last reviewed on May 18th, 2016. I would like to read those. This was continued 2 weeks with the following comments. The trash enclosure is much improved and is approvable. The octagonal decks are acceptable as presented. The entrance to the butterfly pavilion requires refinement in emulation of the original mortar at the hazard wall. The majority of the commission supports the use of stone material for the entrance. However, the details of the stone construction need further study. Soften the corners of the stone at the building corners. Bigger stones should be used in the bottom of the wall. The voussoirs need to be larger. The vestibule needs landscaping. The vestibule has no prelude. Perhaps boulders in the landscape around it would help. Study walls in the neighborhood that are compatible to the height of this wall. The motion was made by Lavoie. It was seconded by Mahan. It was a 7-1-0 vote. Drury opposed. Murray was absent. The motion carried. Hi, please introduce yourselves for the record and give us I don't see any staff, so I don't think there's anything staff needs to say, so go ahead.
Hi, Heidi Jones with Suzanne Elledge's office. I have a quick clarification. The agenda was actually revised. It should be listed under project design. Continued, as you recall, we were here 2 weeks ago. So just a quick note.
Thank you. Dylan Johnson with Jack Teslani Architects.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Susan Van Etta, landscape architect.
Welcome. Do you know why this light is red and not green? Okay.
Makes it look like something.
Press it. Maybe
Good answer.
The sale. It was on sale. Special. Amazon.
I don't know why it's turned around the other way. I don't know what's going on.
All right. Go ahead with your presentation, please.
Thank you, Commission. In response to your comments 2 weeks ago, we have really worked to develop a better connection to the site and the landscape, and I'll let Susan talk primarily about that in a moment. I'll speak more to the specifics of the stone detailing. One of the first things we did after the last meeting was continue to look for precedents of masonry arches and walls that were higher than the Hazard Estate wall, which we had been looking at previously. So if you turn to the second page, actually, we found a great example on Las Canoas Road that goes over Upper Mission Creek, and we thought this it's similar in scale. Some of the details that Commissioner Lavoie was pointing out in terms of the imposts, the voussoirs, and the coursing of the stone were all in line with what we're proposing. So we're using that as as essentially a precedent image for it. We are continuing to look at the detailing of the Puesta del Sol arch there. Again, the keystone slightly more rusticated, and the layout of the voiseurs. So if we go back to the first page, I'll just walk you through some of these refinements. First, you can see the size of the stones. The coursing begins at the lower course is 18 inches, and then graduates down to 16 inches. The middle section here at 15, 14, and then 2 courses of 11-inch stones above. Again, you can see the impost is more appropriately detailed, keyed into the rest of the coursing. In terms of the corners, that was another question that came up. We are proposing to dress the corners by hand when they install this. We're using a large boulder as one of the cornerstones of the vestibule at the sort of prominent corner. And they sort of spill into boulders into the landscape, which again I'll let Susan talk about in a moment. One other detail I'd like to point out is you'll see this when we come back for final. We've removed the 2 light sconces that were here. We're not talking about lighting today, but you'll see that in more detail at our next visit with you. We felt that removing those was related better to the sort of landscape garden setting and less of an architectural sort of building. So that's it for the stonework, and I'll let Susan talk about the connection of the vestibule to the garden.
Just one quick question while we're on this. What is what is the height from here to there?
The spring point is 6'8", and the height, quite honestly, I don't recall the exact dimension.
It gives
the
me
height
an idea.
actually has not changed since our last when we showed it relative
Looks
to
a
the
little
Fleischmann
different,
arch and the front entry arch.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Vanetta?
What is it? Reach so high.
So, I think you should use this one.
We were not showing planting in proximity to the butterfly enclosure because the USDA requires a separation. So in order to soften up the appearance, we're proposing, that's right, to have potted plants there that will be the 4 months of the year where we can't have plants in proximity. Those will line the walkway, which they now do. They would have native butterfly attracting plants, such as salvia and so forth. I have a list here if you'd like to see it.
Continue.
Okay. And so that would allow us to green it up. But actually, looking at this all by itself, it's the context that's really important, because one of the things we're achieving with this new development of this area of the site is that now there is a curb and there's chains and bollards that separate the visitor from the adjacent creek. And so bringing the boulders up and over, actually the feel for the whole area will be that you're right along Mission Creek. You won't no longer be separated from it. We'll have new, nice paving. And so actually the entire environment will feel more a part of Mission Creek is the overall intent. But just in a very particular way, we're adding a little interest near the kiosks with that would provide seasonal as well as thematic interest.
Okay. That concludes your presentation?
It does.
Okay. I will open public comment. I do not have any speaker slips, nor do I have any correspondence, so I will close public comment. Ask the Commission for questions. Commissioner Drury, do you have any questions?
Yes. So you feel that this plan of the vestibule ties in with the previously approved sandstone against what would be the north wall of the enclosure?
Yes, we're planning to use the same coursing, the same layout,
really?
the same type of stone. Are you referring to the proposed sandstone wall at the back of the butterfly garden?
Yeah.
Yes, the stonework is intended to be consistent between the 2 vestibules and the wall that runs behind the back of the garden.
Commissioner Mahan, any questions?
The width of the opening is what?
The width is, it will be just over 5 feet, and the reasoning for that is the operable portion of the gate is just over 3 feet for ADA, and then we have, I believe it's an 11-inch band of the butterfly motif in the ironwork that surrounds the operable portion of the gate.
And the joints in the mortar are going to also be similar to the wall, to the Stegosaurus wall?
Yes, that will be developed more in the construction documents. What we wanted to propose here was to show a more, slightly more regular stonework pattern than we had shown last time, which was drawn completely off of the hazard estate wall. So we're now proposing somewhat more rectangular, somewhat more regular, but still not a classic running bond or anything. The mortar itself, we are going to match the color, texture, and appearance of the hazard estate wall's mortar, but it won't be quite as rough, quite as parts of the hazard estate wall are very, very rough. This will be a little more refined and appropriate to a wall of that height, which I think was a great comment we got last time.
Thank you.
Commissioner Schallenberger.
This is a veneered structure, correct?
It is, yes.
And why isn't the ironwork shown?
This meeting, we were hoping to really focus on the stonework. We thought we were receiving quite positive feedback on the ironwork when we presented it a couple of meetings ago.
What, I've forgotten, and I know you've probably talked about this, but what is the thickness of this, or has that been worked out? What kind of dimension are you thinking from front to back?
I believe it's currently 14 inches. There is the stone veneer itself is a 4-inch veneer, so it's very, quite heavy, and it'll turn the corners. And then an 8-inch block wall, and then 2 inches of interior finish as well.
And then, Ms. Vanyata, you're not intending on using all of these plants in the pots
No.
at the butterfly exhibit. This is just an example of some that have been approved by the Natural History Museum as identified for containers.
The ones that I would be choosing from for this project is the first list, which are the tall shrubs. And then the rest of the list is that if you have an opportunity to visit the museum, you'll see that they have pots along the walkway. So these are choices over time.
Some of them are, more invasive or more exotic than others. So you might want to. That's a comment. I'm sorry.
And they are all native.
Equisetum?
Yes. It's
Which
surprising
one?
how Equisetum haimali is native.
Is it really? Yeah, it is. I know that. Learn something new. Mr. Lavoie.
I have an esoteric question. You mentioned USDA. They have control over what gets planted outside?
They're worried about any kind of invasive insect, and so it would be if a leaf touched and then a butterfly laid an egg, it could leave the enclosure.
Interesting. Thank you.
Saying that isn't exactly what it says in USDA regs, but
that's the idea.
That's an interpretation.
That's why it's there. Thank
Remarkably
you.
regulated, actually.
Oh, thank you.
The size of the mesh and everything.
That's one more wrist tied to.
Yeah, really. Another
The
code one
design.
needs to read.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right, Commissioner Arias,
Nothing.
please. Commissioner Vena, any
I
questions?
guess they're doing away with leaves then, huh? No question.
Commissioner Grumline, any questions?
Do you have the one with the design that was submitted last time? Do you have the?
Staff room.
It's not in the set. I don't have a copy of it.
It's not in the old set.
No, that's the DD
Mr.
set.
Mr. Eng has one. Thanks. What page?
Just for
Oh, here we go. This is dimension. This will be nice to see.
Okay, so 5'4" is the dimension, and then 9'4" is the dimension there. What was your question, Mr.
Oh, I just
Grumline?
wanted to see what the
Previous?
previous version.
Okay. I'm not going to show that.
No, do show that
That's
because
okay.
that generated a lot of discussion.
It sure did.
Looks like a Fort Knox.
Yeah, but there you can, see that that refreshes your memory of what that wrought iron looked like.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Do you want it in front of you?
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. We'll go to comments. Commissioner Drury, any comments?
I think it's terrific. I would support it.
Commissioner Mahan.
I agree. Greatly improved. Greatly improved.
Commissioner Schallenberger.
I was glad you used the term "turn the corner" with the stone, and I think when you come back with final details, you'll want to include in plan view that it's a carved piece of stone as you go around the corner and that it's not a joint as the two meet. I think that's going to be an important detail to simulate stacked block. And I don't know, in the keynotes here it says prominent keystone, but it doesn't really feel that prominent actually, and it feels like maybe it wants to be a little bit larger and also maybe proud in the face. That it's a very fine line, a very fine balance, but it doesn't feel prominent in this scale drawing. So I don't know if that's the intention or if there are some dimensions you want to include when you come back for final, but maybe just explain that a little further.
Sure. And Mr. Chair, can we discuss this at all?
Sorry, let's get to our comments and then I'll ask you.
Otherwise, yeah, I think it looks great. I like the idea of a keyed-in base stone boulder here. That's a really nice touch, and the softening with the landscape is great. Thanks.
Commissioner Lavoie.
Thank you for answering our concerns very artfully. I'm very happy with everything on it. Thank you.
Commissioner Arias.
It's all been said. It's a good job.
Okay. Commissioner Vena.
Kudos.
Commissioner Grumbine. Okay. There's only one comment I have, and that's the dimension or the thickness of this wall. It feels a little bit on the thin side, and I don't know why we didn't pick up on this before, and maybe I'm the only one that's sort of thinking that. But at 14 inches for that tall of an arch and that expression of an arch in stone is, to me, a bit too meager. Where are some of those examples of the inspiration you had? And you can, I think, see what I'm talking about.
Here's another larger.
Yeah, that's obviously much larger, but if you...
Well, just in more context of the arch.
Yeah. I mean, that's much more than 14 inches. And I think that is one of the details, one of the keys that need to make this work. So when you can develop your construction details, I think it's important to get that thickness right on.
Mr. Chair?
I heard Commissioner Drury first, but...
So you're saying basically that will the course of stones be, are you suggesting to be thick all the way up the arch?
Well, if you look at this one here, it actually varies,
right?
Which is difficult to do with your key wall or with your enclosure. But I think it's the thickness, yes, all the way up.
Okay,
all the way up and around.
If it was,
hold on one second, Commissioner Mahan, then Commissioner Lavoie.
In the courthouse, you see this all the time inside, where they've done.
They just fatten it up right there.
Like that. And that gives it what you need without having to overwhelm the rest of the wall.
Yeah,
okay.
It's a nice detail.
Commissioner Lavoie.
That would be fine.
Okay. Any other comments?
Mr. Chair?
Yes?
Just to comment on Commissioner Schallenberger's comment about the prominent keystone, would that be would there be some variation to the face of the keystone and the piece of rock, like a sandstone with some
It could be dressed more. It could. Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Schallenberger. Sorry.
I would leave it to the applicant when they come with their final details, but I'm sure they have something in mind. I just, the word prominent didn't seem to match with what we're seeing here was my only point.
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to summarize the comments, and then I'll ask you.
Yeah, I just had a question for him. I can ask later.
It might be answered in this summary.
That's fine. Yeah.
Overall, the development of the BGE is terrific and has greatly improved. Include in plan view of the construction documents the stone, quote, turning, end quote, the corner. Study a large and more prominent keystone. The keyed in base / cornerstone is great. And enhance the thickness of the arch at the opening. Okay. Did you have a question still?
It's okay.
Go ahead, Commissioner Lavoie.
On the use of language, instead of great, appropriate for the structure.
Okay.
Instead of terrific, it's a wonderful architectural term. again, appropriate to the adjacent historic resource.
You got that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll look for a motion.
Move for project design approval as submitted.
Second that.
Okay. And with the comments made, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. We have a motion by Schallenberger, a second by Mahan. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. You understand the motion?
We do. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
There's a 10-day appeal period for the Super Bowl.
I haven't got gray hair
Say
yet.
that?
They're butterflies.
You have to have, Mr. Chair, you need to do a 10-day appeal thing.
For, this.
David did it.
David did it.
Okay.
Hello.
Thank you.
Oh, my God. I don't even want to talk about it. I can't tell you yet, but I'll be able to tell you someday.
I already got one down there, but that's
In the neighborhood.
all right. The commission is in recess for 10 minutes.
Criminal part.
The next item will be item 3, scheduled at 2:30 for
That's all I
1601
can
State
say.
Street. Ms. Bronson, are you going to? Well, they'll make room for you. Yeah. If you have something to say, we want to hear it. Okay. All right, we will reconvene. The next item on the agenda.
Oh, come on up.
Is item number 3, 1601 State Street. This is a concept review that has been continued from May 18th, 2016. The project or the applicant is for comments only. The project requires environmental assessment and planning commission review. It was last reviewed on May 18th. I'll read those comments.
It's on.
Continue 2 weeks with these following comments. This was a second motion. The Commission recognizes the positive direction of the project. Continue to study the compatibility of the new addition with the existing building. The addition needs to be married more to the existing El Prado building. The overhang on the roof is a good element. The shadow line helps reduce the height of the building. A continuous architectural horizontal element on the State Street elevation will help marry the addition to the existing building. Character-defining exemplary features of the existing building are the strong horizontal soffit that has no header on the 3rd floor and the pattern created by the rhythm of the balconies across the building. The incorporation of Moorish elements in the Brise Soleil may better integrate the project with El Pueblo Viejo district. The north and west elevations need the same layering. The north elevation is the most improved. The landscape composition needs to respond to the mid-century period rather than the contemporary period. A good example is Garrett Ekbo's work. Start to think about lighting. Continue studying the proximity of the addition, especially on the west property line. An HSSR needs to analyze the addition's compatibility to the original building, including the change to the Arriaga Street entrance. The northwest Arriaga Street egress is very close to State Street. However, the Commission recognizes that it is existing. The Commission appreciates the reference on the new elevator tower cantilever to the original tower elevator cantilever. The motion was made by Mahan. It was seconded by Drury. It was a 7-0-0 vote. Murray and Schallenberger were absent. The motion carried. Additionally, review of the historic structure site letter report prepared by Alexander C. Cole. Letter report concludes that the annex building is not considered historically significant. The motion on that was to accept the report as submitted with the comment that the Commission recommends that the applicant include in the scope of work photo documentation, copies of any existing plans for the Delfonso Annex be made prior to the demolition of the structure, and per city landmark standards for documenting structures of merit. The motion was made by Lavoie, seconded by Dree. It was a 7-0-0 vote. Murray and Schallenberger were absent, and the motion carried. All right, I need to drink water off that one. All right, go ahead. Please introduce yourselves for the record. And
Brian Cornell with Christine Perrone, Alex Cole, and Courtney Jane Miller.
Welcome.
So I am going to continue to hammer the Commission about being able to send me along towards a DART submittal. Again, we need to go to Planning Commission on this project. We're going to have a long road to hoe relative to environmental review and whatnot, and so our goal is to be able to have your commission at least with comfort say that you can make the compatibility findings. But I want to assure you that we realize that the details involved in this project are going to be immense, and they're going to be worked out at the HLC once we're done with Planning Commission and come back to you. So there'll be plenty of opportunity for that. But just as a reminder back to where we are, of course, this is the existing El Prado at Arriaga and State Street, and the addition.
Move it a little bit so it's more in the screen.
Sorry.
There we go.
Yeah.
Good. And I'll use the pointer.
Please.
So first thing that's been very important is that we have a clear and distinct separation between the massings of the building. So there is a clear demarcation. And, reading the Secretary of the Interior standards, working with Alex, that has been a very important piece of this, to disconnect these two. And obviously look at then the compatibility of the building, which you all have been very focused on. That very important, the screen wall that we have incorporated into the project is in line with the existing El Prado. So it's 10 feet back from the back of sidewalk. And then the mass, the 3-story mass, we have intentionally moved it back further than this adjacent building, Suzanne Elledge's building, that is one door up. So we have a 22-foot setback to that plane, and we believe that is a really essential ingredient relative to this streetscape. Then along this western or northwestern property line, you can actually see from this photo how much it has been pulled back, not only from the State Street side in terms of that D'Alfonso annex addition, but also along that property line. So we've pulled this back a full 10 feet from the property line, but then in addition, we have these rather large insets, which have been determined based on the critical root zone of these two oaks, which need to be preserved. And then finally, along the property line here to the west, we have this existing residential complex, which I think is, it's a women's shelter. And that, I'm not sure we had these photos before, but this is what it looks like from Arriaga, by the way. And it's kind of an interesting building. This, of course, is the edge of the existing El Prado, which is right at the property boundary. And then looking at it from the other side, looking at it from the property side, this is looking at that project and the existing bamboo hedge that is here. And then another vantage point is actually seeing the bamboo hedge in relationship to El Prado. So again, this line is on the property line, and we're pulling back a full 10 feet to preserve that bamboo hedge, which is about the edge of that, the inside edge of that doorway in terms of reference. Okay. Then I thought I'd also share with you this photo, which is taken, actually this is the driveway of the adjacent, the next parcel over to the west, so you can kind of get a sense of the relationship of that driveway to the women's shelter. And then a photograph back here shows this existing carport, which is right here, looking back towards our property. So there's actually a drop in elevation at that point, and we again are going to have all of that being back 10 feet from the existing property line. So that's kind of the overall neighborhood context. I'd like to then go straight to, we can refer back to the plans if you'd like to. I'd like to go straight to these renderings in terms of what we have done, because I think they show the relationships best. We've kept the overhang, which we think was very successful in terms of creating that horizontal, but we've brought the windows.
Pull it a little more so we can see it in the screen. Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
A201?
Actually, City TV, could you zoom out a bit? Out. Not in, out.
The other way. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great.
So here we brought these windows. I think this was an excellent suggestion, is the importance of bringing the window head right up to the underside of this overhang. And speaking of detail, it's very important, I think, what that precise detail at that overhang is. It's not going to just want to be monolithic plaster. It may be just a really fine, line that separates the vertical from the horizontal. But those are the kind of details that obviously we'll have more time. This really gives the sense of the two buildings together, the importance of that screen element, which again will be a cementous material. And actually, in that regard, Alex and I have talked. We have that right now sort of aligning with this balcony line, and it may want to be a smidgen below that. And so when we study the modules of this screen, I think it'll be an opportunity, if the commission agrees, we could lower that a little bit. But you can see here that we've introduced these more horizontal balcony elements in kind of an interesting pattern to help carry that horizontality on through. If we look at the elevations
on A200.
And here I think it's important to note that, we certainly from the very beginning acknowledged
I think you see A200.
the existing El Prado and the checkerboard pattern that was critical to design. We've always had the part of it where we've checkerboarded kind of almost in reverse, where we went with railings. We used the railings versus the solid plaster, which we thought was a playful alteration. And as you look at our elevations, we've still maintained that checkerboarding. Just now we've introduced some more horizontal.
Actually, let me go back to this because I'm on the wrong sheet. So I'm going to go back one this way. so we can see all of the elevations.
Okay, we're on A200.
So, ultimately, I think this will again require refinement of study of exactly how that rhythm happens. But then you can see we've sort of introduced that same rhythm to this north elevation. This again along the Suzanne Elledge property, which I think helps. Here we are almost exclusively using windows and not balconies. So these will be horizontal screen elements really, and not actually using the balconies. And then on the west elevation, we have introduced that same element and also have kind of a patterning to the windows, which helps to break that up. A key element again along here is going to be that bamboo hedge. So before I hand it over to Alex and Courtney, I actually printed this for us.
On A200.
I think this is a comparison of where we started on your first review, the next review, which shows the addition of that roof overhang, and then where we are today in terms of the basic compatibility and massing. So I think these give us a good sense of the evolution as we have been visiting with you. An important part of the project, as you know, is going to be Alex's Phase 2 analysis relative to maintaining the historic integrity of the El Prado when we do this addition. So we've been talking a lot about what to do on that Arriaga side, and Courtney and Alex spent some time debating that whole thing. So Alex, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you talk about that. Site plan?
A site plan or an elevation of the Arriaga Street?
I don't.
I've got both.
Okay.
You have an elevation of the
Courtney, why don't you
Arriaga.
switch with me?
All right.
While she pulls that out, Chair Suding.
Oh, I was going to keep it.
No.
Chair Suding, while she pulls that out, I wanted to make a note of clarification that the Commission cannot make compatibility findings today because we do not have the structures report for you to review for compatibility analysis. They wanted to move forward without it last time at the request to get more comments on massing, but we do have to wait for the structures report.
That makes sense.
So site plan here, and we have an elevation here.
Okay. What do you want? Right here. Okay, we're on L2.
Alexandra Cole, architectural historian. Now, one of the things, or two issues that were important insofar as historic preservation were, how can you keep the importance of this original entry if it's not going to be the original entry anymore?
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to lose the circulation from Arriaga Street. And so from my point of view, that there's still cars going from Arriaga Street in here and in here. They're just not being able to make that loop anymore. And so what we were proposing is instead to how to attract people to this entrance in order for it still to feel like a viable entry into the inn. And so what we got talking about was we looked back at, this is a plan that was sometime in the 2 years between.
1 second. City TV, could you please zoom in? Thank you. Pardon me.
Yes, thank you. So this was the way it was in 1959. So sometime between 59 and 61, this right here was where the historic Canfield building had been that was torn down because it was a fire danger. And so there were several years before the annex was built in which they used this space where the Canfield building had been as a putting green. Mm-hmm. So the suggestion was, let us move the putting green down to that space in here, where we have taken out, we'll have taken out the drive-through, and you just have still you have the cars being able to go in and out, but this whole area in here by the entrance will be blocked off, made into lawn, made into low hedges, so that this can be used as the putting green. Now the thing is that this is still going to be a very used doorway. It's not all going to, all the traffic is not going to shift immediately up north. This is where a lot of people come out to go into their cars and where people come out if they want to walk downtown. So that was the suggestion, to continue the usage, historic usage here, but just reversing north and south here. And the other issue that was germane to me was I wanted to make sure that when the plantings were done in this area, that the views from the street, particularly of the screening, which is so important to the style of the building, that these not be hidden. And so that's what Courtney is going to go over with you. We talked about this a lot as to how to achieve a certain amount of privacy for these second floor corridors. As the owner said, these open air corridors make the people walking along them feel not entirely as protected as they're used to. And so I was wanting to somehow use the landscaping in order to somewhat screen these areas where people would be walking. And so the trick here was to have that kind of screening, yet still allow the historic elements of this Arriaga Street facade to read. So what Courtney and I came up with is what she's going to present now.
Okay.
Okay, so as Alex mentioned, the main focus of our attention since the last meeting was on the Arriaga side of the building. We like the idea of introducing a putting green or more active use to this area, so that's what you see here. And the other main move that we did was make an attempt with a schematic level drawing to bring it more in line with a modernist aesthetic. So what you see here is kind of some angled forms reminiscent of the trapezoidal shapes on the balconies on the building. I made an effort to provide more of a composition to the landscape so that instead of having straight, very linear, more contemporary rows of trees and shrubs and the rows of tight organ pipe cactus, we've shaken it up a little bit and brought in more of an asymmetrical design throughout.
Shaken, not stirred.
Shaken, not stirred, yes. Throughout the property. So you'll see things like, one palm here with two on the other side. They're in conversation, not symmetrical, but, there's definitely a composition to that, both in plan and as you stand there and experience it. So that's the main move we made. Otherwise, we looked at changing up some of the material for screening along the west and north sides of the building, so incorporating Leuphostemon. Previously we had the sweet shade there, and along this property line as well. I think this is more appropriate. Introducing another bamboo screen along this part of the building where it's a little bit tighter. And also introducing a gravel element here, so you see the white color. The idea here was to have something that gives more of a clean sort of spare look at the front in between the hedge and the sidewalk. So the idea would be just to have some white gravel with accent succulents there and along the driveway here and potentially here as well, although that's a raised planter, so we're still studying that. But the big moves were really just to address the overall composition of the landscape. And then I'll just share with you a couple more images. Plant palette hasn't changed. As Alex showed you, this elevation gives a sense of the tree massing along the elevation here. So we looked closely at where do we have these more exposed conditions on the second level, where we have the open wrought iron railing versus the stucco. And the effort was to address a semblance of protection there, so perceived privacy in the form of the sweet shade trees, which are very airy and light. I have an image here. So that's really the only element that we kept from the previous plan was, trying to maintain an effort of maintaining privacy on that side of the building. So as you can see, they're very light, and the idea would be that the canopies would be pruned, a minimum of 8 to 10 feet off the ground, and they would be kept very thin. And then palm trees are placed, sparingly along that side of the building as well. So the idea is to keep them away from the building, and all you really see is a trunk in front of some of the more important architectural elements. The other thing that we're doing on this side, which I mentioned before, is pulling some of the material off of this element here. So we'll be moving these two palms and pulling the bougainvillea off the building to help bring more attention to that important architectural feature.
Okay, does that conclude your presentation?
I just want you to make note of that wonderful little postcard rendering the roof deck.
Yeah, I noticed that too. And then, we're studying lots of different forms and shapes in the style of authentic mid-century. And
does that conclude your presentation?
That concludes our presentation.
Staff, do you have any comments that you feel need to, okay. I will open public comment. I have one speaker slip. Mr. DeForest, you have the floor.
Two questions.
Speak up, please.
Two questions. One is there a timeline for this project from the owners? Do they want this done? When do they hope to get the addition to the hotel? Is the question. And then the second question is, I'm still unclear how the entrance, is the entrance then off of the current automobile entrance off of State Street going to be completely abandoned? And what does that do, the abandonment of that entrance, what does that do to its historic feature? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. DeForest. I'll close public comment and ask the Commission if they have any questions. Commissioner Grumbine, do you have any questions? Commissioner Bena. Commissioner Rios. Commissioner Lavoie, any questions?
Actually, Callum's question. The old entrance provided an area where one left one's car while one checked in and got their luggage into the building. How are you accomplishing that now?
Yeah, that is going to occur now off of State Street here. So this essentially becomes a covered porte-cochere area with the accessible spaces, so cars can be dropped off at this point or go on and go into short-term parking and then down into the major parking down below. But as Courtney and Alex talked about, it's very important to keep that entrance and that eyebrow that exists on Arriaga, and that in fact is kind of the entrance to the area that's going to be the exercise room, meeting rooms. So that's going to be an active area for the guests, and we anticipate that actually they'll be using that quite a bit coming and going downtown.
Got it. Thank you.
Commissioner Schallenberger, any questions? Commissioner Mahan?
No.
Commissioner Drury?
Yes. Is there any traction to a suggestion to build that curved porte-cochere that was proposed for the original El Prado that we talked about years ago? There was illustrations of it. I mean, I'm just thinking that might be this is a statement. It's a question.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I mean, it obviously wouldn't have a function.
That extends.
It's okay.
Okay.
It wouldn't have a function really on the Arriaga side.
No, I was thinking in the new.
Well, in the new one, we have a similar sort of feature. We haven't tried to emulate that same shape, but we have a large eyebrow element, which we think is going to be very important and dramatic over that vehicular entrance.
Right, thank you.
And I should just maybe...
Commissioner Vena, question?
How many parking spaces do you have for the unit?
One per bedroom.
How many units are they collectively?
122.
122?
122.
They'll all be under that.
Some of them exist at this upper State Street level, but they are all covered and out of sight, yes. And if I may, just as far as answering Kellum's question about timing, I think it's just a function of the process through the city and getting entitlements, which could be a year and a half.
Question for Ms. Miller. The introduction or the transplanting of the putting green to this entrance, is that really going to be successful? I know that's a hard question to answer, but I'm trying to grapple with it in my head, and maybe you can add something to that would assuage me and make me feel a little bit more comfortable that is really going to be successful and is going to be interpreted as what your intent is. I'm going to with that question is the introduction of the white gravel. Can you talk to me about how that fits into the rest of the site, or is it something that you feel is wanting to be isolated in this location to give it that importance? I need more discussion about that, please.
Sure. Well, initially I had the same reaction you did.
Okay.
And we made an effort to address a few things to provide both an active use with the putting green, but also allow for some layered landscaping to help address its relationship to the building. This is a more exposed side of the building. It's the southeast side of the building, so shade is important, and we're going to continue to study that. But for now, trying to introduce some tree massing, if any, between it and the sidewalk is important. We also have the street trees that help. But I think initially it felt a little odd to me, to be honest, but I like it now. I think it makes sense. I think, this is a quieter side of the building, it being on Arriaga rather than State. It has a relationship with the activity across the street at the market. They have outdoor barbecues and things like that. So I think that as a whole, this kind of block, it really could activate the entire block.
And this also is, it definitely is functioning as a family hotel. A lot of families do stay here, and it's kind of a nice amenity for that function. I mean, the owners actually like it from a standpoint of an amenity.
Yeah, and it's
in relationship to that new exercise room area and what's going to happen.
That's what I was going to say. Also, the exercise room would be here, and it opens up to this lower atrium courtyard. So this is kind of the active use zone, if you will. And otherwise, we look at things like addressing, specific height of this hedge. I think we have 24 inches right now, so that it's not fully closed off from the street, but there's a relationship there.
What about that white gravel, Courtney?
And the gravel
is so mid-century.
It is, and it's sort of appropriate.
Asked for.
But going into comments,
how are we?
I've not seen the relationship to the other landscape elements, and maybe that is intentional, and I want the landscape architect to respond to that, please.
So obviously we've paid more attention to the design of this area, so it came out of that study. I've incorporated it in a few smaller areas for now. I see it as something that ties both properties together.
Okay. All right. Any more questions? Commissioner Rios, question? I'll get to you.
I'm not a golfer, so I'll ask a question. How many holes are there in a putting green? Just one?
No, there'd probably be like 3 per area, something like that.
I think multiple.
Yeah.
And let me ask you this question. Since you're encouraging this for families, and you would have children doing this, how would you prevent the balls from going out into the street and the kids going after them and the safety factor?
Well, I think the putting greens are small enough that, the kids are putting just to the holes. They're not slamming the balls hard, but there'd probably be some kind of a little curbing or edge to that so that.
You have children like I have children. Come on.
Not anymore.
It's probably they're still your children.
Yeah.
All right, Commissioner Grumbine, please. I'm sorry, were you finished?
Yes.
I had a question about, 2 questions actually. One was on page A101. So I just wanted to understand the shape, these buildings that you have the footprints of marked out on the, I guess we're calling this one the north, so it would be the west side of the property. Those 3, which, can you call those out? You showed the pictures. With these right here? Yeah.
Yeah, it's right here.
These 3.
Yeah.
So these 2 buildings are residential apartments, and that's a carport.
And maybe, just want to make sure that.
So we're looking right here at the front of this building and the wall of.
That is the wall of El Prado.
Yeah, and then there's a secondary building here, which basically this is the back of this building. So you're looking at this face.
Okay.
And actually, just to finish the conversation relative to this photo, then here you're looking at the face of this building here
From the El Prado site. The annex site. Okay. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair?
One other, sorry. One more question.
Continue.
Totally separate, though. Is the balconies, and just your thoughts on, I noticed that on page A105, for example, that has a good kind of summary, and then maybe comparing it to A101, because it's a lower level floor, but I think the condition it raises is an interesting one. But I just want to get your thoughts on the connected balconies on A105 of 16, 17, 18, and 19. The units 16, 17, 18, and 19, that balcony connection. And then as well the 1, 2, and 3 at the top.
On A102?
Back where you were.
Sorry.
Same sheet.
Oh, same sheet.
A102 is the parking structure.
Beg your pardon.
Go ahead, Christine.
Yeah. For those, what we've imagined is one, creating that horizontal element with the balconies, and we do see those as kind of pierced metalwork that will relate in some way ultimately to the primary screen, but that's yet to be kind of finalized with more detailed level of study. Separating those is something we might have with a small, again, low balcony rail that separates them. But as you can see, these are not deep. These were never intended to be kind of balconies where you have a chair. These are just little step-out balconies, enjoy the air, and just enjoy that sense of expansiveness. So we didn't see that connection between them as a
Well, and I want to add, ultimately, we may not really even provide access to these balconies. As I was talking about on that north elevation, this may just be an operable window, but it's a screen element that creates that horizontality. But we don't see these as usable balconies.
Commissioner Turi, did you have a question?
Yes. Could you just briefly say what the fate of the hairdressing, the little building that sits off on Arriaga?
It's currently leased as a little hairdressing salon, and we'd like to keep it that way.
Good. So it's just going to stay as is. Yeah. And good. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Comments, Commissioner Turi. Any comments?
Yes. I'm not a fan of golf, I just can't imagine a putting green on Arriaga Street. I'm sure it's supportable. I just probably wouldn't support it, and I would like to see instead some more of Miss Miller's imaginative, creative imagination of Courtney Miller's let loose on what would be a putting green, and I think the opportunity to create really beautiful, appropriate landscaping should not be passed up for a putting green. That's my comment.
Commissioner Mahan?
Yeah, we're having our third mini golf tournament at the courthouse,
and you didn't have any balls go into the road, did you?
The 3 years ago, when we decided to do this, we had all kinds of people worrying about the kids knocking the golf balls out into Anacapa Street. And we went ahead anyway, and we did it, and no balls got knocked out into Anacapa Street or even onto the sidewalk. It seems like everybody, putting is, I don't know, it's a very civilized thing, and
yes,
I think it'd be a nice addition to the neighborhood. Would be a little putting green out there. But to the architecture, I'm impressed with how this has evolved, and how the new architecture has reached toward the old, and been sympathetic to it, and still be creative and new and a new exciting building. I'm very pleased with it, and I think it's headed in the right direction, and I think this should go on to Planning Commission.
It can't go on until we have the structures report.
Mr. Chair?
Just to remind you.
Yeah, Ms. Hernandez reminded us that we can't forward it to Planning Commission.
No, but I'm just saying that
you think it's
as far as
ready.
I'm concerned, it's ready to go.
All right, Commissioner Drury, please.
Mr. Chair, I didn't realize we were also commenting on the architecture.
Well, of course.
May I weigh in?
That we're just here for the putting green?
Well, that was the most important element. What strikes me is not only has it improved dramatically, but now it looks like the original El Prado was more like the annex to the new building, which is really, I mean, I don't know how you did it. Cornell Collective, once again, strikes. But I think that these changes are great pluses and eminently supportable.
Okay, Commissioner Schallenberger.
Well, Commissioner Mahan hasn't seen me miss a putt.
It's not very civilized, is it, when you miss a putt?
At all.
I can only imagine.
But I'll just comment. I think it's an interesting idea to, just maintaining the historic use. I mean, I see why you did what you did, and it does feel appropriate to mid-century architecture to have some, call it flat landscape, if you want. But I like the sort of the low amount of biomass on that facade. I buy all that. So I would think that whatever it is, if it's a putting green, it would have other uses. It's more of just a grass gathering place that would probably happen to be a putting surface at some point. So I'm for the concept, or I could support it anyway. And I have nothing but positive things to say about the architecture. I do the playful interchange of the screening of the Juliet balconies. I think all work very, very well, and just a very successful project.
Commissioner Lavoie.
I'd echo those comments. Quite often we ask for things literally and we get them figuratively, and here's a good example of a very good interpretation of our recommendations and comments. The building is very compatible with the existing structure, but doesn't copy it. It emulates certain elements of it, but doesn't, again, literally copy it. And it makes a wonderful ensemble of buildings, both old and new. The old clearly identifiable, the new clearly of its own age. I think it's going to be a very handsome building. And the same about the landscape architecture. It is greatly improved. I think very compatible with the original style of the building. I don't follow the putting green argument at all. It was an element sort of in the backyard of the original hotel. If it had been an element of the entrance, this is the Putting Green Hotel, okay. I would have accepted it in the front entrance, or what was a remnant of the front entrance. I think restoring the old entrance canopy, or the intermediate entrance canopy, I guess it is, not original, says more about entrance than a putting green. So I wouldn't mind seeing the putting green concept abandoned for someplace else on the property, not that there's much space. But I don't think it is an appropriate interpretation of entrance, where just some nice enhanced landscaping appropriate to the building is much more so that than adding an element that wasn't there originally.
Commissioner Rios, any comments to add to that? Commissioner Vena.
I wanted to ask you a question. What did you designate a color for the gravels around adjacent to this?
White.
White. I have a hard time with that. I can see it black, but not white. I just couldn't contrast with the walk or anything else like that. But that's just my feeling. I think we'd have a richer contrast.
Commissioner Grumbine.
Okay, I think that I think it's leaps and bounds. It's very good. I like everyone else has said. I know this is a down the road thing, and I think that those balconies will get finessed a bit down the road. But I think that you're right on there. As for the white versus black rock, I have to go with the white rock because my grandparents had the white rock in their flat roof 50s house, and we remember that all the way up.
And it would be white balls. Also.
Oh, that's true. So you gotta pick white rock or golf ball. And the putting green I don't mind as much just because it's the easiest thing to change over to a grass lawn than so it's the easiest to change. So all in all, I think it's great.
I'll weigh in on comments specifically about the architecture. It is vastly improved, and I think the architect is to be commended for listening to our comments and developing their own imprint on it as well. I think that's very important. We always want to encourage that. So kudos to the architecture. The putting green. Perhaps the problem with the putting green is the fact that we're calling it a putting green, and that it would have holes to be used as a putting green. Maybe it's just an active lawn area, and I know that the landscape architect is proposing to use artificial turf, and everybody may cringe at that, and I sometimes cringe at it too, but I've seen some pretty successful and convincing artificial turf. It's a small enough patch that it's not going to, be obtrusive. So maybe it's not calling it a putting green or not making it a putting green, and maybe it's just an active lawn area or a passive lawn area with, chaise lounges or benches and tables and things like that. Maybe some umbrellas out there might help sort of activate that. I do lament the fact that we are not using the Arriaga Street entrance as a historical entrance anymore. That being said, I think in order to pay homage to that, the reintroduction or the implementation of that intermediate canopy is important, because I think that we don't want to lose that entrance as being the historical entrance, and by eliminating the motor court or that circular driveway, if you will, that becomes even more lost. So I feel like we want to put something back to pay the homage to that. with the crushed rock, I feel that it is a very appropriate mid-century solution. But so is black rock too. They used it both places or both instances.
1970s.
Okay. In any case, I'm probably going to regret saying this, but I think that maybe there should be more of it. It seems like it's not reading as important enough in what I'm seeing on this plan. Either you go all the way or you don't do it at all, kind of thing. It's either all or nothing. Go big or go home. So, that being said,
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes, Commissioner Lavoie.
If Commissioner Mahan, in the 1960s,
what did you have around your house?
That's where I come from.
What was used on modernist buildings for aggregate? Was it white?
Yeah, white.
Or was it
gray?
White.
Gray.
Light gray.
White. Well, maybe it was light gray. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Again, I'd like to make a motion.
Do you want? Okay, you can summarize the comments.
Could the revised structures report be ready in 2 weeks? The answer is yes. I'll make a.
I review them promptly. It's up to the planners and everybody else that has to review them.
We will try.
Okay. A 2-week continuance for review of the historic structures report addressing the relevance of this building to the historic resource. I believe that's the focus of the report. And to commend the architect and the landscape architect for an excellent design job of a building that we find acceptable, both to the resource and to the guidelines. Period.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion by Lavoie, second by Schallenberger. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chair, I would support the motion as long as there's no mention in the future of a driving range.
But there was one out in back. It was a cow pasture.
Okay, we have a motion. We're discussing the motion.
Yes, we are.
Mr. Drury?
Yes.
Do you have something else to say?
No, I do not.
Okay.
I just better be quiet.
Motion, consider a comment or a discussion on the intermediate canopy that was on Arriaga Street.
Yes, that the commission would request the restoration
or implementation
of a previously proposed canopy that was the entrance as the mitigation for the loss of the car entrance at that location.
Okay. Any other discussion? Mr. Cannell?
I haven't consulted with my clients, but I think it's actually an excellent idea because the reason we couldn't do it before is it was too low. Cars were hitting it, and so it wasn't practical. And now with that not being a car entrance, it's actually an opportunity to be able to do that. So, and it will provide a shade element there, which will also be nice.
Good.
Okay. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. You understand the motion?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll handle it.
Yep. A lot of work went into that.
Put a putting green in if you wanted.
Apparent.
If you want a real fight.
All right, next item on the agenda is item 4. And I want to let the commission know that we are 10 minutes behind.
Yeah, really.
This is a pre-consultation review for a new item. It is a public hearing for 414 Chapala Street. Comments only. The project requires environmental assessment and planning commission review. The one-time concept review of a proposal to demolish an existing one-story, 3,200 square foot commercial building and construct a new 4-story mixed-use development with 4,000 square feet of commercial area and 22 rental units on a 15,246 square foot parcel. The residential component is being developed under the average unit density program, the AUD program, and proposes a unit unit mix comprising 3 studio units, 12 one-bedroom units, and 7 two-bedroom units, with an average unit size of 809 square feet. There will be a total of 31 parking spaces located within a ground floor garage. The project requires a concept review by Planning Commission for the AUD development in this priority housing overlay and on a lot greater than 15,000 square feet in size. Please introduce yourself for the record and give us a brief presentation.
Brian Cornell, Christine Perrone again.
Somebody just joined you.
And Brad Vernon.
Welcome.
So this is Woody's on Chapala across from the Chapala 1 Sevilla building. And David, I think, do we have photos? You all know it. This is probably will be most helpful as far as orienting this. So this is the building next door to the northwest.
City TV,
That's
could you
not
zoom in?
Woody's.
No.
But
City TV, could you zoom in? This is west of the property.
And of course, further west of the property is the wonderful, what is now, I'll call it the Alchemy building, and then of course the old Casa Sevilla that was there. And then this, of course, is the property that we are looking at. And that's across the street. And you know that well. I've also got a couple of photos here that I think will be helpful as far as the rear of the property. And let me look at this while we're doing this. The existing building is a...
City TV, zoom out.
Existing building is a block wall along the Ablets property. You notice the Ablets are here today. So there is a little bit of a yard or a gap there between the existing building and the Ablets building. And this is actually, believe it or not, that's the rear of that building there on Chapala that I showed you in that first image. So this is very conceptual, as staff has mentioned. We have 22 residential units. It's primarily residential with a little bit of commercial. So the idea is a central entrance that's flanked by a couple of small commercial spaces, an elevator access that would be from the parking lot, and then also some kind of a pedestrian access way off of the southern edge of the property, which is where the little Honda of Santa Barbara is. So this is all covered parking at grade. This is a color version of this, but I want to point out that our plan is really silent but needs to address this rather large eucalyptus. And I'm in the process of having an arborist look at this, but it is really a very large tree, as that one photograph. If I can have that photograph again, Judy. As this shows, this is a large, Phil, you can probably tell me what variety this tree is, but it is right on the property line. So we're going to have to address that and account for that. And so I just want to make sure you realize that. And the design right now, from a plan standpoint, really isn't doing that. So we're going to have basically some kind of condition here that deals with that. We have very simple little hand-drawn elevations, but I brought along a couple...
City TV, could you zoom out? Pardon me.
I brought along a couple of quick massing studies that you can look at here as far as giving a sense of the building if you're viewing it from the north and those existing trees. And then, of course, from the south on Long Chapala, adjacent to the Honda of Santa Barbara. The intent here really is to have a simple, rational, two-story presence with commercial on the ground and offices above, and the residential is all behind that. I did a very quick little sketch of sort of an alternative. We're in the process, or once we get your comments, we will obviously progress with exactly studying this west elevation and whether that little vehicular entrance is an Audi or an Innie or what, how we want to handle that. And I think that's about it. Christine, do you have anything we want to add? Oh, I should mention we actually show here, indicate a fourth floor, and what that is really is just small little bedroom pop-ups from some of the units below that basically become town. So those are some of the units here are townhomes and are 2-bedroom units as a result. Most of these are small little 1-bedroom efficiency units, though.
Right. And those are expected to be kind of smaller elements of architecture that you see popping up above the 3rd level.
And I think those little views, the little massing view, kind of gives you a good sense of the visibility of those 4th floor elements.
Does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, it does.
Okay, do we have any staff that wants to? We don't have any staff. All right, I will open public comment. I have one speaker slip and several emails. Mr. DeForest, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. I just wondered what the height of this proposed structure, what you propose to be the height of this structure, and are they will this be the tallest building in the block?
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeForest. All right, I have an email from Laurel Rose. She lives across the street at 401 Chapala, and I've heard about plans to build on a lot that used to be Woody's. I'm concerned about the parking issue, as I hear only one parking place per unit is being allocated for the building. The parking in this area is mostly non-existent. Many of us in the 401 building have only one space, and there's virtually no place for us to park outside when we have guests staying over or if there are 2 people living in the unit. This is making the area highly congested. My thought is that if they were required to have an underground parking facility at this new building, then there would be enough parking and they would not have to park on the street. I'm also concerned about the traffic that this building will bring to this neighborhood. The traffic has been dense here lately. Another building will just bring more people to the area with more cars and noise. She is supposed to be at the meeting today, and she hopes that we will take this into serious consideration. I have another email from Sharon Campbell regarding the possibility of redevelopment at 414 Chapala. She resides at 401 Chapala and has done so for 1.5 years. She's lived in Santa Barbara 20 plus years. She's viewed the plans and object to the 4-story development for the 414 Chapala property for the following reasons. Street parking is already an issue. It's limited in front and surrounding our building. Tenants, guests, and patrons cannot find parking. The plan allows for too dense a population and not enough parking to accommodate them. The high traffic volume coming off Gutierrez Street and in Chapala will be further congested. While I realize there is a shortage of housing, I don't understand all of the development at a time when water is on such short supply. The building will obstruct the only small view I have of the mountains from my balcony. See the attached pictures and decrease my unit's value. The obstructed views will decrease the property values of our entire building as well. I would like to receive any further communications and information regarding this project. Signed, Sharon Campbell. I'm just going to really quickly put those on since she provided them. Another email from Kathy Houlihan. I live in the Sevilla condominiums across the street from this proposed development.
It's confused.
Yeah. Who's talking? I'm just concerned about the inadequate plan for parking. As a result, customers park in the street. The plan does not have parking spaces on the property for the service vehicles which come to make deliveries, perform home services, install closets, clean apartments, etc. This results in too much demand for parking and constant parking enforcement in the garages.
It should be the same.
Thank you for allowing me to register my concerns. Kathy Houlihan. Sent from her iPad, by the way. May concern. This is from Stephen Volumir. I'm sorry if I've messed up that name. To whom this may concern, my name is Lim. Does anybody know how to pronounce that? Vulemir. And my husband and I live at 401 Chapala, across from the proposed development. We have 2 major concerns. This will add to the already impacted parking conditions in the vicinity. The proposed 4-story height is overly imposing on the area. While we appreciate the top level be mostly open, accompanied by Spanish-style architecture, the project would be more desirable if the developer and HLC would considering lowering the height from 45 feet to 3 stories, with below-ground parking expanded to more fully accommodate the residents, commercial businesses, as well as viewers. Thank you, and respectfully submitted, Lynn and Steve, Vuilleumier. I'm sorry. Last email is from Dean Anderson. As this project seems to be in the early stages, I want to know that the 4 tools listed in the web address ID 17280 were observed. Especially the graph of analysis of the proposed building would be a much greater bulk than any of that on the block inside of Chapala Street, including the historic Casa de Sevilla at 428. A zero setback combined with building's 45-foot height would make it highly imposing to the public and block existing mountain views. I will watch this event on Santa Barbara's online option. Thank you very much for reading my comments and sending them to the HLC. Sincerely, Dean Anderson. And
that's the document he referenced.
This is the document he references in the that web address that I was representing. Okay. And it's a comparative analysis of 3-story buildings for downtown Santa Barbara with respect to size, mass, bulk, and scale, written by William Mahan, 2005. These are the 4 tools he is talking about. I believe everybody on this commission is familiar with that analysis. If not, I suggest you make yourself familiar.
You have to appreciate
All right, I will close public comment.
irony of those comments coming from people in the Chapala 1 building. Mustn't we? I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm closing public comment and asking the commission if they have any questions. Commissioner Grumbine, do you have any questions?
I guess my question is the question that's already been asked, but I just want to confirm that basically the 4th story goes up to the 45-foot height limit. Is that correct?
Yeah, it would not.
Portions of the 4th.
Portions of the 4th story would go to the 45-foot height limit. Yes.
And it is built out, except for the pedestrian walk on the one side. It's built out to the property line, everywhere else. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is.
On
but
the
again,
ground floor and then steps in.
We will have to accommodate the trees, which we really are not at this point with the design along that northern property boundary. So that's likely to affect that condition. And it is set back from the Chapala, the minimum 5 feet per the AUD ordinance.
Okay, that's it.
Commissioner Vena, any questions?
No question.
Commissioner Rios, any questions?
To access the refuge, you would come in the covered drive? The garbage?
No, the garbage would be accessed off of this pedestrian, basically off that southern edge.
And how wide is that pedestrian?
I think it's 10 feet.
10 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How many bathrooms total in the project?
Well, most of the units have 1 bathroom, and were we putting a second bathroom in the 2-bedroom?
You're right. So we have the distribution of...
Turn it on and closer to your mouth.
There you go.
So we have 3 studios, each has a 1 bathroom. We have 12 1-bedrooms, each has 1 bathroom. And then we have 6 2-bedrooms, and those have 2 bathrooms.
And the commercial?
And that would have probably 1 unisex on each side. We haven't looked at that yet.
So there'd be 2 more, so it would be 29 bathrooms, correct?
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned that there was commercial in the project and offices at the back, I believe you...
No, we basically have like small retail commercial on the ground on Chapala, and then above that on the 2nd floor would be office. Again, it's a relatively small amount of office. We have sort of a common roof deck then over the top of those offices.
So how many offices are you planning?
Well, it's only, what's the square footage, Christine?
We have a total for all the commercial space is 4,000 square feet.
Right, but how is that divvied up?
Up above, it's 2,000 square feet, roughly evenly distributed. So you'd rent out 1,000 or 1,000.
So you'd have 2 offices maximum upstairs?
2
Probably,
rentals,
they're about 1,000 square feet each. Yeah.
Okay. And the total number of parking spaces allocated for the commercial is what?
It's 1 per 500, plus I think we're in a slight zone of benefit here, so that's what it's been calculated at. And then we have 1 space for each residential unit. But for the 2-bedroom units, we are proposing tandem parking spaces so that those residents can have 2 cars, which we sort of believe that if, in these AUD projects, I think the 2 bedrooms probably need more than 1 car.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Lavoie, questions?
It's somewhat a rhetorical question, but what happens when your neighbor builds a 45-foot-high building to the property line on either side?
Well, we've designed the building to, and the decks to set back, so they would have to do the same thing. So any deck space and that kind of thing has to meet building code requirements relative to openings and property line protection. So, we obviously don't anticipate that's going to be the case in the near future here to the north, but it, very likely could happen to the south in the near future.
And that has the 10-foot setback significant.
Commissioner Schallenberger? So you're only counting 1 space for the tandems, but really there's 2? Is that in your count here?
The count is the 1 space per unit, but then there's the additional tandem space.
5, yeah. Okay. And then, so why not do underground parking? Why not make that part of the program?
Well, obviously, we're not going to be able to get very far into the ground with the distance that we've got here. So, it would, and it's additional cost that, I'm not sure at the end of the day what the benefit is, because we do have elevator access from the parking up to the 2nd level. So if I'm going to have decent retail space at Chapala on the ground, which needs, I think, at least probably a 12-foot ceiling, then I have a real discrepancy between my podium courtyard area and the elevation of the offices above. So it just really makes sense to have that deck that has the office, basically the office in front and the residential units behind, all at the same level.
Yeah, you don't really have the grades to help you there, right?
And it would be, as I said, I mean, we've ignored this tree thus far, but I'm going to have to. There's going to be a significant condition there, and any further excavation is going to be more damaging to those trees, which I believe the arborist is going to tell us are important to preserve.
Commissioner Mahan, questions?
I'm looking at the elevation there. When you called it the south elevation, is that really the south elevation?
Oh, those are incorrect.
No, that's completely
really
wrong.
The north
I apologize.
elevation.
Yeah, that's a mistake. That's north, and this is the south.
This is south.
Yes, thank you, Bill.
Yeah. You said you wanted the commercial would have to have a 12-foot ceiling, but you're showing 11 foot here on that in your elevations. How does it? What does that? How does that work?
Well, I said ideally it would have a 12-foot ceiling, but it's going to have whatever that is. So if I'm showing 11 feet now as that floor height, that's what it, that's roughly what it would be.
That's what it would be. See, so when I add these all up, and I get to the 4th floor, I'm at elevation 32 feet, and then the top roof is 45 feet. So the question is, do you really have to go that high?
Well, I mean, in these small units, I do believe, I mean, we can probably quibble about inches, but I would like to have as close to, and we've had these discussions, a 10-foot ceiling as possible. Now, if we end up with 9-foot ceilings or 9'4", that's probably good. I certainly would hate to have an 8-foot ceiling in these small apartments. So I think it's just working on those levels. So I think there is there's certainly a minimum criteria at the parking for all the utilities and stuff that comes down. So typically we try to have a minimum of 11 feet floor to floor at the ground floor, and I'd probably like to have a little more for the retail. And then I'd like to get those ceiling heights within the units reasonable. And then the assumption was on the 4th floor those are just bedrooms, and those could have lower ceilings. We could tuck those down and reduce the plate heights.
You could possibly clip the wall and...
Absolutely. We really want that fourth floor piece to really look diminutive and secondary to the overall building mass.
Yeah, I don't have any other questions.
Commissioner Drury, any questions?
I have no questions. Well, I guess I do actually. Has there been an opportunity for you to give neighboring building heights? I know across the street is a fairly significant building.
Yeah, that's in
401.
excess of 45 feet. Yeah. That's close to 55.
55.
Yeah, and then on your side of the street, I think that the tallest building is probably the Tower at Del Pozo.
No, I mean the Alchemy building on the corner of Chapala and Haley. That's 35 feet. And then then the peak of the building to the north, which is an insurance building. I don't know. Do you know who designed that, Bill? This building?
Like KBZ, actually.
That is also at about 35 feet.
Okay.
That ridge.
I don't know who designed that. Ken Kruger, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Or Quetzal Goodman.
Yep.
And then there's also right behind us is the old Forense building where
Forense Leather used to be.
Before Forense, and now it's Sonos, and that's a little over 45 feet actually.
Isn't Albert's Tower in there?
Atlas is probably...
That's in there behind you too somewhere.
I would guess that's 45
That's
feet.
4 stories.
52? So that's 52 feet.
Question I have you had a chance yet to talk with any of the neighbors, specifically the neighbors that provided correspondence to us?
I haven't talked to the neighbors who provided correspondence. I did talk to Bob Kubiak, who has his office across the street. And that's all we have talked to. We want to reach out to these neighbors certainly about the trees. That's the most important neighbor in our thought. But
comments then, Commissioner Grumbine, comment. And remember, this is here for pre-consultation review comments only.
Okay.
Your comments very undetail oriented.
Yeah. Okay. Me?
Everybody. No, everybody. I'm sorry.
The cool curl on your ironwork. So I think that the thing that really is the most striking is the sort of the maximum push on everything in every direction, which is it's sort of the big mass. One of the aspects that I do like about some of your elevations are that you're not trying to wedding cake it as much. I think that's that sort of always stacking effect can often cause roof problems, and visually it's worse. It tends towards worse architecture. So I do like that aspect of it. That there are a fair number of strong walls, but the downside is those strong walls are pushed to the property line as well, and it is as Commissioner Lavoie had hinted. What happens when your next door neighbor does something similar, and then even the balconies become very, very built to. So those are sort of at this stage, those are my main concerns. The other issue is the parking, and I'm not quite sure, especially when the tree comes in and how those will all work out. I like the idea of the tandem, but those numbers seem. I just need to visually see where all those units are going to be. So,
Commissioner Vena.
Question: are you required additional parking for commercial, or is that?
That's in. Yeah, we've parked for the commercial, and again, this is in the central business district, and I think, Christine, we are in a zone of benefit, aren't we?
Yes, that's correct.
So, what's our zone of benefit?
I think we're 50%.
Yeah, so we parked at the 1 per 500 rate for the central business district, and then we're able to reduce that by the zone of benefit percentage. So we have parked the commercial according to zoning.
Commissioner, yes, comments?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Vena, did you have any comments, or was that just?
No, it just seemed like a bit removed if you fall into that category, that it might be, in other words, a removed location for whoever's going into the commercial facilities that you're providing. Anyway.
Okay. Commissioner Arias.
I have problems with the bulk, and also if adjacent buildings also go to the same heights, the impact that it will have. I'm concerned that there are so much correspondence regarding this issue, this building, that I would urge you to reach out to the neighbors and talk with them. The City Council has adopted this AUD program, and there are impacts that it causes on neighborhoods, and ultimately, if the neighbors are unhappy with the design, they have the right to appeal to the City Council. I would like to see the height of the building reduced. I don't find that there's that much neighborhood compatibility. I know that there is a large building nearby, but I don't think that sets the precedent that I want to see this neighborhood develop as. You're going to find a great deal of changes with if the trees are going to have to be protected, and that will have to come back to us for further consideration. I don't think, given the number of units you have and what people generate in garbage, that the location of your garbage and the walkway up to serve those, are going to be large containers, is going to work. And I think that you need to look at the practicality of what people produce in garbage and how it can be efficiently handled by the Marburg company. I appreciate the fact that under the commercial and the offices you are adding additional parking, but when I look at the neighborhood and recognize the parking that is there now, it's going to be a very severe impact, and it's going to be a question whether the commercial can survive with adequate parking. That's essentially my comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Loy.
I have little doubt that it will be a very handsome building when you're done with it, Brian. And you perhaps have been too successful in packing too much in too little a site. And I think that is the problem that needs to be solved. It just is too intense, too massive, too big.
Okay, Commissioner Schomburger.
Well, just speaking to the height and massing, I think it's important to differentiate. Just because a building has 4-story elements to it doesn't necessarily, to me, make it a 4-story building. This, to me, reads more as a 3-story building with some projections within it, which I think can be successful. I'd rather see a tastefully done 4-story building even than a poorly done 3-story building or 2-story even. So I'm not afraid of the height or the additional levels that are being proposed. I would just like to see as we go forward how that all comes about. We're still in very conceptual stages here, and but I do think that the applicant has made some initial attempts to not maximize. Actually, they're in a zero setback zone and have not maximized that zero setback. And they have not, they're in a zone where they can go 4-story, and they haven't done that completely either. So I feel like there is some initial attempts to not completely build this thing out without consideration for the neighborhood. But I understand they have a fine balance with the program and what the lot is zoned for, and the AUD program as being one of the elements here. So all that said, I just think it's a little too soon to even judge the size, bulk, and scale and the massing. I'm just generally not afraid of some four-story elements in this area.
Okay. Commissioner Mahan?
Yeah, I generally agree with all of the comments that have been made. I think that if we have to have AUD in El Pueblo Viejo, this is a better location for it than some of the other projects that we've looked at. And there are a number of big buildings already, so neighborhood compatibility probably isn't an issue. But one of the things that I discovered when I was studying the height of buildings, and it came out in the Barry Burkus building right down and across the street. I don't remember the name of that building, what they call that building.
I think
the brown.
Chapala 1.
No. He's talking about the one catty corner.
Yeah, Barry Burkus, the brown one. Anyway, he had the
Chapala Lofts. No?
That's right.
Yeah, Chapala Lofts. He had the commercial on the corner, which had the very high ceilings. He wanted the high ceilings for the commercial, and then because he wanted a level floor above that, the parking structure had very, very high ceilings, which was a waste of space. And I think that it would be appropriate to study that, see if you can solve that problem. I know you need to have the height for the commercial. Maybe the garage could ramp down. Maybe you need 2 elevators, and it might be that you'd save enough in building heights in the residential area to pay for a second elevator because the floor levels would be different between the commercial and the residential. I think you should study that because that could really lower the mass down quite a bit. And I agree with Commissioner Schellenberger that this fourth floor really isn't as fourth floor-y as it sounds. And 2 weeks ago we had another project like this, and we had a model, and I think a model would help to demonstrate that. Some kind of a study model would help to demonstrate that, and you might want to show that to Planning Commission too. So I think there's possibilities here, and study those two, that the second floor doesn't all have to be on the same level.
Commissioner Drury, any additional comments?
Yeah, I think that I agree with the previous comments. It's more sensitive than some of the behemoths surrounding it in the neighborhood, which I deplore. And I'm just worried about the ultimate resolution of all the buildable space on Lower Chapala above the highway, that we're at risk of creating a canyon, basically, a big canyon. I hope that we tread lightly, but this project is a much lighter
tread,
thank you, than some of its neighbors. That's my comment.
Mr. Chair, if I can ask a couple of questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, first, I guess I'm a little perplexed about Judy, you were the only one to really bring it up, but the issue of the neighbors in the Sevilla building, because they obviously are complaining about the loss of their private views, and it just doesn't seem, I mean, under the circumstances where, that's not something that we can do much about if we put a building, I mean, even a 2-story building in this location is going to probably block some of their views. So I just don't know how much I'm supposed to really try to do about that. My other question is related to your comment on the traffic in the area. I mean, our office is right near here. I drive by here many times, particularly midday, and there's always parking spaces along Chapala, always. There's never, terrible traffic on Chapala, and that block of Chapala is not heavily traveled, so I don't quite understand the concern about traffic and parking. But it's important that this, as I said, it's important that we park this per the ordinance, and we believe that we should go further with the 2-bedroom units and provide that extra space. So we intend to continue on that road.
Commissioner, yes?
Since the question was directed at me, I'd like to be able to respond if it's all right.
Go ahead.
I didn't mention parking and traffic. That was in one of the letters that the neighbors wrote. You'll also find that my suggestion to reach out to the neighbors would help them to understand the project And the more input that you get, the better project you have. And given the tone of some of the letters, there's a lot of concern. It never hurts to spend some time talking.
Thank you.
And you end up with a better project in the long run. And they are concerned, they live there, they have to deal with what happens, and they should know what the impacts are going to be and what they are not going to be.
Mr. Chair, just a point. We really can't protect private views, is that correct?
That's true.
And
Okay. Anybody else?
One other thing. Actually, when the neighboring buildings were built, I asked that same question. What happens to your balcony when the neighbor, in all of his governmental rights, builds a building as tall as the one you're living in, or going to be living in, or designing, I'm sorry. It was to the architect. To me, it's a valid question. You have to understand that this is an urban environment, and that someone will have the right, has the right, to build a building as big as the one you're building. So what happens to that view out your unit or air and light when it will happen. It may not happen in our lifetime, but it will happen eventually. And so to me, it behooves us to create buildings with that in mind, that there will be walls around it, and to create a space that is resultantly very livable when that happens.
What is the pleasure of the commission? Would you like me to summarize the comments, or would somebody like to try for a motion?
Summarize the comments.
Is there
Summarize.
a motion?
No.
There's no motion, right?
Comments only.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. Okay, so I will summarize the comments. The maximum push to almost each property line is problematic to the massing. However, the articulation on each elevation is appreciated. The commission is concerned about the...
I think that may have been a comment, but that should be addressed. There wasn't a maximum push to the property line.
That's why I said an almost maximum push. Okay. The commission is concerned about the quantity of parking provided, both for the residential and commercial spaces. However, we recognize the ordinance compliance. The commission urges the applicant and the architect to reach out and speak to the neighbors. The commission is struggling with neighborhood compatibility. The trash enclosure may be undersized. The program packs too much, is too intense, too massive. The projection and configuration of the fourth floor is appreciated in that the fourth story isn't completely built out. Try to solve the problem of the first floor ceiling height with the parking garage ceiling height. Consider developing a model. The comment was made that this project has a much lighter tread than neighboring projects.
9 conflicting opinions.
It is 9 conflicting opinions,
Yeah.
but I'm trying to get a consensus.
The one, I guess I would just ask the question on your comments is the one about the parking. I'm not sure I heard that.
Okay. The commission is concerned that the quantity of parking provided, both for the residential and commercial spaces. However, we recognize the ordinance compliance.
But is that a consistent concern?
Actually, it's not in our purview.
Yeah, it is not in our purview. I think I would like to see that I think the commission appreciates the tandem parking, which is extra.
Okay. If parking's not in our purview, then why did 4 or 5 commissioners mention it?
Because they always do. We always do.
Okay. Then
and actually
that's a discussion for another time.
Well, no, the applicant has provided the parking required, and in fact gone to the effort of providing more parking than what was required, and that should be noted in the record as being actually commendable.
Mm-hmm. So you want to strike? Go ahead.
And as a more summary, this is the beginning of a process.
Mm-hmm.
And the building needs to be further manipulated to make it appear perhaps less dense than it really is. And you know, we have a talented architectural team. that's a place to begin. That's why he's here. There's mixed feelings about the fourth floor. I don't think the fourth floor is really that. Again, if it's done right, this massive a building works. This tall a building works.
And you slipped the word massive in there in one of those comments that I wasn't sure I understood.
I'm the one that said that. I think
Don't look at me.
Look at me. I said that. I think as the building looks right now, it is too massive.
Okay, so we're going to strike the comment that the commission is concerned about the quantity of parking provided. We're going to strike that whole comment, and we're going to say the commission appreciates the 5 additional parking spaces that are provided in the tandem configuration.
Yep.
Okay. And then I think that probably all of the other comments stand.
As a direction.
Yep.
So I don't know what the rules are now as far as we've applied for concept review. I'd like to return and address your comments. So I don't know if we can continue this or what our rules are.
Well, this
now.
was agendized as a one-time only concept review. So I'd like Mr. Eng to weigh in on that.
So, Mr. Chair, the applicant can continue on if they pay the full design review fees, and if this board either wants to continue this project to Planning Commission or return it back to the full commission for review at a future date.
It needs to come back to here. So it's up to you. If you want to continue with us, there are some fees involved. And then we'll try to get you to the Planning Commission.
So do you think that we, Mr. Chair, could we continue to try to work things out with you? We'll go ahead and pay the additional fee if you're comfortable with that. So we can come and pay the fee tomorrow and continue it for 2 weeks, because I'd like to try to work things out. We do, we have to go to the Planning Commission conceptually. The threshold for them is 15,000 square feet, and we're just over that. So we will have to go to them conceptually. But I'd like, obviously, to make sure that your commission is comfortable before we do that.
Sounds like an absolutely great plan.
Okay.
2 weeks?
Let's try it.
2 weeks. Okay, we're not making a motion because it's comments only, but we would like you to. So one of the comments would be we would like the applicant.
Actually, Mr. Chair, you would need to make a motion with comments only, no approvals.
But they can continue it to.
Just a motion to continue.
Okay.
A motion to continue.
2-week continuance.
I'll make a motion for a 2 weeks continuance.
Second.
Commissioner Mahan, Commissioner Drury, under discussion. Any more discussion?
Mr. Chair,
yes, Commissioner
it
Mahan?
would be very helpful on the fourth story if the architect would give us the percentage. What is the percentage of the fourth story compared to the third story? Because it's not really a full fourth story. It's about a quarter.
And do we have in our comments for a model?
Yes.
And I was going to actually ask that question. You can see here that we've begun to model it. Does this meet your criteria for a model? We can obviously shoot a lot of views. We can bring the model in and we can move it around.
Try us.
Okay, let's try that.
All right. Any other discussion?
Well, I would say,
All right, all in favor? Oh, Commissioner Schallenberger has a question.
Suggest that the applicants include the setbacks on the upper floor, or just to mention it.
Okay.
For the next
one. With the percentage.
All right, calling the question. All in favor?
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Opposed? Abstained. Motion carries. We are going to take a 5-minute break. Good. Next item on the agenda will be item number 5.
Item number 5.
Cantwell.
How about skeet shooting?
Skeet shooting.
I mean, redoing the lines going right.
Academics.
We're just trying to get around.
We're just looking at the grandstand
He's
today.
snarky and awful.
Pardon? We're only looking at the grandstand today.
Well, there's no, I don't think there's only anything to see on the
My
screen.
my best friend, I told him he's being snarky
But
because he
we're
learned
gonna
from the
bring it up
best.
'cause
And
it's
I was like,
Yeah, we're not supposed to make comments about it.
All right, the commission will reconvene. If we could get ready for item number 5, 700 East Anapamu Street. This is concept review for a new item. It's courtesy review of a proposal to replace the Peabody Stadium grandstand at Santa Barbara High School and bring it into compliance with current building and accessibility codes. The new grandstand, including a new press box restrooms and storage spaces. The project also includes leveling the sports field and replacing the following items: the turf with an alternate playing surface with lower maintenance requirements, the 400-meter track, the lighting and the sound system, and the storm drain system under the complex. Additional improvements are proposed to prevent ponding and flooding in the stadium. This is a city landmark: Santa Barbara High School building, Peabody Stadium, stadium ticket booth, municipal training building, and gymnasium. This is a courtesy review only. Please introduce yourself for the record and give us a brief presentation.
I'm Dave Hatyank. I'm the Director of Facilities and Operations for Santa Barbara Unified School District. There was a agenda change. There's only 2.
Oh, if you could turn that. Okay. Thank you.
I'm Dave Hatyank. I'm the Director of Facilities and Operations for Santa Barbara Unified School District. And just for the record, the 2 structures on the campus that are landmarked are the main building and the Figueroa Street ticket booth. The other structures are not landmarked, but appear on a tag somewhere within the city system, and because of that, they popped up in the agenda.
Ms. Hernandez?
Yes, they were, all 4 of them were listed on the potentials list, and then when the 2 were designated and 2 were waiting further.
So if you could correct that project description, that would be helpful.
That was the revised agenda that I told you about.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't even get that. Okay, great. I mean, you gave it to me, but I didn't print it, so go ahead, please.
And I'm Matt Gradius from KBZ.
Welcome. Go ahead. Don't fight.
Well, the stadium is adjacent to the Figueroa Street ticket booth, and the ticket booth is a landmark site. The district has an agreement with the city that states that if we're building next to an existing landmark, that we will come here for a review. So we are here to give our presentation and to look forward to receiving your comments. I'll let Matt go over the start of the presentation, and if I can provide any technical assistance, I'll be happy to do so.
So I'm sure most of you are familiar. This is actually a photo from 1925. This is post the earthquake, the big earthquake. Notice that the school is still standing. And the impetus for this was Frederick Forrest Peabody, who was president of the Board of Education at the time. After the high school was built, there was a significant inquiry about why there was no athletic facility. So he fully funded the building of the stadium for $100 grand. Kind of a good deal. So that's kind of the start. There's also some great historic photos, just as an aside, that show cars all parked along this area all the way back to about here. And we do know, and from just family history, I know that stadium used to get about 8,000 people when there were big games. So anyway, that's just an aside to the structure we're doing. Part of the other reason I wanted to bring this photo to you is that there's, which we'll mention in the project, is there's a pretty significant a neighborhood storm drain that passes through the site from this end all the way across to this end, and we actually think that's the reason for the shape that the field actually took, because it actually stops short, almost equidistant on each side of that storm drain. So that's probably a reason why they didn't put it over in this area of the field. But just an aside, some history on the facility.
Well, as Commissioner Schallenberger pointed out too, the size of the stone pines on Anapamu is quite interesting. The little lollipops there.
And hopefully they'll stay in scale.
And the stadium was built prior to the existence of building codes.
Oh, great.
So that's actually a bigger part of the picture. And sort of the start of the inception of where we are right now, there's been a pretty strong desire to have an all-weather facility that is much more conducive to the use among the student athletes and the general student population. So that's kind of why we're doing this work. The district did perform a significant analysis regarding the retrofitting of the existing stadium, of the original Peabody concrete stadium. And retrofitting was deemed kind of not feasible due to the cost impacts, and the ability to make full use would be significantly impacted by the retrofit techniques and alterations that were deemed necessary by the state architect to meet current codes. So we're talking about accessibility, we're talking about structural, we're talking about all those components. So that's the other kind of reason why we're looking at this newer facility. And in addition to that, the sort of current condition of the track and the stadium itself is can at times provide limited use just because it's not set up. The drainage is, at the existing condition, the drainage is terrible on the site. And there actually has been periods when the bowl filled up about 2 feet deep with water in what seems like a rainstorm that we might have had. So anyway, just to give you some of the key site features, just a side note, in the original drawings, this was actually like designed this way, and there was a plywood piece that would fit on there with a piece of asphalt on it so that you could run in that outside lane. And it was actually designed with these removable stairs as part of the system when it was originally conceived. This is kind of how it is today. There's how they're dealing with accessible seating right now. And up on the upper level, there's some areas for, I believe, scorekeeping. But there is some significant areas of damage that have been sort of retrofitted to support the existing structure. But looking at the techniques that would be involved in fixing all this, it was pretty difficult. So that's just kind of the why we're here.
As part, if I could add, as part of the investigation by the Division of the State Architect into retrofit during versus replacement, they had to concur with a study by the architect as to the costs and methods for each. And in order to gain matching funds of almost $3 million from the state, we needed to concur and do what they recommended. And their recommendation is that they would not contribute towards a retrofit, but they would contribute towards a replacement.
On this note of why we're here, just briefly, please. So they're here because of the proximity to the adjacent historic resources, correct? The stadium and grandstand, the field, the track, none of that is a designated historic resource, correct? Or even potential?
The stadium was on the potentials list. It's on the potentials list.
Grandstand?
It's the stadium as a whole is what it said. And then they are well along in their environmental review, and we have commented on their document on the historic assessment. And they did do the analysis to the National Register criteria, and so we've commented on that. So there, and so that is why, because they are close to 2 landmarks, and it was on the potentials list. So that's the evaluation. Your review is.
Okay, thank you. So, and that's just as a side note to that, this is the ticket booth right there.
Right.
So, and I'm trying to see. Looks like this is an abbreviated set. Doesn't seem to have. Can I borrow the smaller one?
Sure.
I just wanted to start here. That's the
City TV zoom out. Thank you.
This is kind of the configuration as is. Just wanted to give you some context here. These are pretty significant hillsides on all sides, so we are in this kind of bowl-shaped area. Most of you probably are pretty familiar with that. I'm sure most of you graduated from there. So that's kind of, I just want to talk about that briefly as the overview. This is where the stadium is now, is this portion right here. And the field approximately goes like this. Across there right now. So that's how it's not aligned to either the visitor or the bleacher itself. So that's now on to the improvement portions. Kind of with all those constraints in mind, with this steep hillside over here and the steep hillside over here, What was done is we started with the existing visitor bleacher element and used that as our sort of northerly limitation. And then we basically started to build the track from that, stretching it out to avoid going too far to the south, or approximate south, I guess. So to kind of give you the key components here, this is the grandstand component here. This is the reconfigured track with the sprint line, and then we've reconfigured the Walk of the Dons to make it accessible. So that's how you come down into the stadium. It's very similar to the location of the existing one. In fact, you can kind of see the imprint of the existing one is probably 3 feet south of the new one. Some other issues that we're working with are there's a pretty significant neighborhood storm drain that goes subsurface here. Is it about 12 feet, 14 feet down, something like that? Yeah. There's actually was a secondary one put in sometime in the early 80s. And we're having to reconstruct that system because it's pretty severely damaged. And we did. So that's something that the school district is actually fitting the bill for, which is actually a benefit to the city or beyond their property line. And so some of those things impacted, like you can see that we started with just this, but we're getting impacts into bigger areas just because we start having to deal with all of these storm drainage and slope issues. So that's kind of one component that we're dealing with in the process. If we can go to, well, we can stay right here. Just to look at the key access points, we're focusing on the access point from the existing campus or in the existing campus and the historic ticket booth. So there's the main points of access for the stadium. If we can go to L3, which is, I'll kind of address the landscape issue. This is the landscape plan. If you look on L3.3 is the planting list. We could probably, let's see if we can do this, because we might be able to just,
no,
sorry, okay. I'm sorry? Yeah, L3.3 is the planting. But it's mainly, we're using a lot of plants for slope stability, but the main tree species, there's a couple of eucalyptus that are going to be here. We're doing some live oaks, and there's also some olives in the mix in this area here. And we do have some palms kind of going down where the Walk of the Dons is. There's a lot of agave on the as the low planting, and most of the shrubbery the shrubs are evergreen species or specimens. And we can get into the plant list if we want to just look at that real quick.
Mr. Vena, are you looking at the plant list?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's okay.
Okay. And then we'll kind of go back and look at the structure itself. We're going to A300.
Quite nice.
The top drawing is the field side elevation, so this is what the visitors would be looking at from across the field. The other elevation is kind of approximately where you would be on Rinconada looking back. And it's basically a cast-in-place concrete structure. There are some steel beams to support structural precast concrete bleachers. We are doing a cement plaster exterior with some architectural precast cornice elements, wall caps, and some ornamental ironwork, as well as some tile niches, which we will discuss in a few minutes. And I think that pretty much goes to the extent of our elements. We've tried to do is strong a job as possible as to, like, there's no roof penetrations, so we're venting and doing everything through the cupolas. We have decorative grills on the side for our outside air intake and some things like that, so we're trying to stay as period as possible. Let's see here. The windows are, we have hollow metal doors for the exterior doors. You'll see that they have a raised panel, a custom raised panel. And we've worked with the manufacturer on achieving that. And then the glazing and windows are inset aluminum storefront system. And that kind of goes to the end of the presentation for us.
Okay. I will open public comment. I have one speaker slip from Mr. DeForest. Mr. DeForest.
Yes, I have some questions, and friends of mine who went to high school have some questions and some concerns. The first question is any of the 1924 stadium to be preserved, or is it all going to be taken out and new seating put in? And is the seating going to be seating, or is it going to be the concrete benches that are there now? Then I just, and some of the former Santa Barbara High School student alumni are a little concerned that this is sort of too much. It doesn't look like Santa Barbara, so I would like a discussion of why does this fit. It is in El Pueblo Viejo, but I also realize that it's a high school, and under current regulations, we have very little to say about the design, but I think it's a little overpowering compared to what was originally envisioned by Mr. Peabody. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeHorst. I'll close public comment and ask the commission if they have any questions. Commissioner Dury, do you have any questions?
I do. I have one. Is the district committed to artificial turf?
Yes, the district plans on putting artificial turf in. That would give this site parity with San Marcos High School. Right now, it may be we're looking at the same exact systems as San Marcos High School. Right now, during football season, as many athletes know and many students know, everyone stays off that field until the first football game, and by the end of the season, it's basically dirt and mud, and you have to close it again. And with the demands on the field these days of not only football, but soccer and lacrosse, and limited land space, it's almost the way of the future to go with an artificial turf.
Okay, did that answer your question, Commissioner?
It does, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Mahan, any questions?
I have no questions.
Commissioner Schallenberger.
No questions.
Quick question. What is your inspiration for this architecture? Is it something you picked up off of the existing school building? Talk to me about it.
Yeah, we actually, we actually looked at some of the elements on the existing building. They, although not in the main portion or the wings of the building itself, there's a pretty strong cornice with the tile sort of recessed behind the cornice. That was one portion that we looked at. We looked at how they sort of treated the window surrounds on the main campus. And while we won't go in as sort of detailed as this, right, I think it's something that we did. That's kind of where we drew a lot of the inspiration from.
Thank you. Commissioner
Can I see that? Mr.
Mahan,
Chair?
do you have any questions? Or Commissioner LaVoy, other bill questions?
The view of the back of the building, the south elevation, is the main entry level below Rinconada? That middle section, is that below? Yeah. Or is it at that level?
It's below.
It's below Rinconada.
By about?
Yeah, I can give you the.
4 feet.
Yeah, about 3 to 4 feet, depending
Okay.
on where you are in Rinconada.
Okay, thank you.
As you know, it starts at the ticket booth and kind of wraps down, so it starts heading down towards the condos on the end of the street.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Rios, any questions?
Yes, 2 questions. What type of material is going to be used in the artificial turf? And I'm thinking specifically about the ground-up tires that are used in some of the, which are now shown to be dangerous for the students.
The current fill for the turf has not been finalized, but currently it is scheduled to be the rubber crumb, and from everything we've known in talking to consultants in the state, there's no scientific studies out yet that say that the rubber crumb is a hazard to students. There's been some articles on it.
In Scientific American, yes, there were articles about it. Okay. The next question I have is, what is the capacity of the 100-year the storm drain?
The storm drain is currently a 36 and a 42-inch system, and we're replacing it with 2 42 inches.
And what is that capacity in terms of storm drain, in terms of flood control?
It will handle a 25-year flood. If there's a 100-year flood, water will be retained on campus in the basketball court area upfield and on the baseball field to the south of there.
Then let me ask you this question. Considering that you're going to have to disrupt the entire field, would it be wise to put in a 100-year capacity drain now and not have any problems in the future, including having to pay flood insurance?
In dealing with the entities that control the storm drains, I believe that the engineers determined that if we put in a larger capacity intake here and it was restricted at this end, it would cause major flooding at the bottom rather than having it pool and run out over the capacity. And that was an engineering decision to prevent. Otherwise, we'd be creating a problem that doesn't right now exist downstream, and we'd be liable for that.
Thank you.
Point taken. Commissioner Vena, any questions?
No questions. I have comments.
Commissioner Grumbine, any questions?
Yeah, I guess it's not necessarily a question for you, but what is our purview over this project? Is it in the same manner that, in terms of architectural?
We can make suggestions to them. However, they don't have to adhere to our suggestions. Most of the time, though, the applicant does listen, and if there's overriding circumstances where they cannot take our comments into consideration, then so be it. But it is important for you as a commissioner to make comments that you feel are germane to the success of the project.
And the district welcomes those comments because the HLC Commission does provide good comments. We've experienced good comments in the past, and we've adjusted projects in the past. And later on in this presentation, we'll be specifically asking your opinion on some things.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Drury, do you have any comments?
Yes. I'm sorry that grass is a thing of the past. It's more fun to play on. I remember that. But I think that the architecture seems to be pretty exemplary, and it's rather imposing. And now San Marcos is going to be behind. Although I went to Bishop, I still have affinities with Santa Barbara High School. I think it's a good-looking project.
Commissioner Mahan?
Yeah, I agree with that. They're not just doing the minimum; they're trying to do something very nice, and I applaud them for that.
Schomburger?
The only thing that I agree with those comments, and the only thing that really stood out to me was it looks like, it feels like the two tower elements, call it. It's better seen in the elevation views, but the two tower elements, it feels like this structure is only being used as a balance. There doesn't seem to be a programmatic use for this space that justifies that massing. So I'm not exactly sure what the justification for that is, or if it needs to be so symmetrical, or if there's a chance. I don't.
You want to go to the elevation?
Yes, thank you.
It was what, three?
One tower contains a stairway and one tower contains the elevator.
Okay. We can't put the elevator and the stairway in one tower?
No.
No.
Well,
It would be a...
That doesn't.
I mean,
the floor plan doesn't indicate that. Belabor the point, but
it's too late.
I mean, there's a vestibule and an elevator here, but the stair is a small portion of this.
There's provisions in there in the future for an elevator stop for the top of the press box. You can't have filming on the top of a press box without...
Get the microphone closer.
You can't have filming on the top of a press box without accessible access. And so there's a stop, not on this project, but there was room for a future stop for an elevator on top of that structure if anybody ever in the future deemed that it was worth spending the money on. We're under a tight budget for this project, so we're making provisions for the future while not having a stop there today. Right now, they're going to be forced to film from within the press box instead of on top.
Right.
Commissioner Lavoie, comments?
I think the symmetry is an appropriate response to the historic buildings. Actually, it's a beautiful design. It's usually what we get after we fight over this stuff for months. And to see it come firsthand, it's really kind of nice. It's pleasant. The only thing that I see that looks out of place, and it shows up perhaps on the perspective on the cover, is that overhang.
Oh, cover.
Yeah, I was going to say, we could.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
On the left side. No, the left side. That one.
The cantilever thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's going to be visible, but even if it is, how you make that look credible in traditional architecture needs a little more work.
Okay.
Not just some brackets sticking out and these. You're headed in the right direction, but it needs a little bit more work, as if it could be actually built out of masonry. in a certain period.
Mr. Chair, just a minute. I'm going to let everybody make their comments.
I'm going to finish with the comments. Yes. Commissioner Arias, please.
I like the architecture. I think it will be outstanding. I urge you to investigate very, very thoroughly the material you use for the turf. According to my scientific readings, it's not the good stuff to put in the ground-up tires things. So I would ask you to be very, very careful what you put in there, because you're dealing with young people.
Commissioner Vena, any comments?
Yes, several. First of all, on artificial turf, I know that they have used some of it in various places. I know they have a soy product that does not give you the inherent problems that the previous synthetic turfs had. It may cost you more, but it does not have the essence of petroleum. It does not build up heat factor. It just lasts about as long, and you have a good quality product. Like I say, you will have to pay more for it. The other is, in the past, usually, having done Dos Pueblos High School, I know that the budget is usually gone by the time it gets to the green. By that I mean as far as the turf is concerned. A lot of the problem with the soils, with the turf and so forth, and the wear and tear on it, of course, is the soil preparation and what goes on beneath it. So usually you run out of money when you get to that, and they just paint it green or whatever they can do, or minimize it, and that's unfortunate, because if it's going to be done right and you're going to spend this kind of money, it might be nice to investigate that possibility of having actual turf which will last by proper soil preparation and considering the percolation there. Knowing the soil there, and a lot of it is cut and fill, and most of it is cut, and it's all the debris that nobody wanted anywhere else, and they've compacted it thoroughly, the drainage is going to be poor in any way, shape, or form. So as far as the landscaping is concerned, certainly for the trees, you might consider additional drainage out of each of the proposed tree areas, so that any moisture that builds up in excess, as opposed to creating a bathtub and creating problems, you have an exit for that water, since you have the uphill advantage, presumably in the planting of some of the banks. So as opposed to just digging a hole and not having any exit, I think you'll have better plant growth and so forth, and more viability by considering subdrains, whether it's to the exterior or into the storm drain system. And as far as the percolation is concerned, I don't know that you can attach to the storm drain system or not. And if you can, you have an ideal drainage system for your field. That's about all I have to say.
Okay. Commissioner Grumbine.
Okay. I think the only comments I had to add would be a few pretty minor small ones. So maybe I can swing over and try and point them out because they're hard to see on the.
Does it involve ironwork?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
How'd you guess?
How'd you guess?
So, let's see which way.
Where's the pointer?
I think you can probably see it in the perspective best.
Okay, where's the pointer? So you don't have to breathe out of my neck.
Sure, sounds good. So I just in noticing this looks like a steel cable treatment. If there is, especially because you're, and I think jumping back to Commissioner Mahon's, or actually, sorry, Commissioner Lavoie's comments, I think that the symmetry of this structure really works great with the high school itself. I mean, in plan you can really see that there, and I think it's a fantastic move. Sort of following that logic and following some of those cues, perhaps looking at some of the railing within the high school and playing off of that a little bit more might be helpful for that. And just a comment I would say. And then this opening here seems to be very, very deep compared to the width of the wall. You did beef the wall, which is really nice, but it seems to be so deep that when you look at the window above it, you have this giant, massive sort of opening in, and then the window above shows that your depth of wall is only is thinner. So it might, if there is a way of getting that to not be quite as deep, that would be nice. And then I think that that element there, if there was a on location or some sort of a detail of transitioning, swooping out, or actually even the armory might, not too far away, might have some cues for sort of a massive way of cantilevering. And then in a similar way, sort of this transition, if there is some sort of a step down or if there is some other way of resolving that. And then when you're turning the corners on the moldings, it might just be the rendering, but it's sort of stopping short and then.
That's the rendering.
Okay. At some point, you can only draw so much. But all in all, I mean, I think this is usually like 3 or 4 or 5 reviews in that you get to this level. So I think it's a really very successful. So
we should have probably pointed out in our presentation that top section is cantilevered.
Oh, this one, right?
Top section of seats is cantilevered.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, I'm just saying in terms of how you support it visually.
I understood. Okay. Yeah.
And that's it.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Drury, I think you had something?
I didn't know.
Okay. Commissioner Schallenberger?
Oh, yeah, just to clarify, I do commend the architecture. I like very much that it is an inspired, but not trying to replicate or duplicate the main building. And I do like the symmetry. I was just concerned that the form was only to establish the symmetry. I wanted to make sure there was some function to that space. So I really want to commend you on you've used a simplified version of the existing architecture and taken out the ornate nature, but still in keeping with the design, with the architecture there. It really works well. Thank you.
Shall I summarize? All right. Let me summarize because I might answer some of your questions and then we'll have a discussion.
Okay, perfect.
Architecture is exemplary. This is a good-looking project. The symmetry is appropriate within the context of the campus and its buildings. Study the cantilever on the rear side of the grandstand to make it more credible, perhaps using corbels. Study using the healthiest artificial turf product available. Proper soil preparation may support the use of real turf. Consider additional drainage for the tree planting pits and for the subsurface drains in the field. Study the railing ironwork using existing ironwork at the school building for inspiration. Study the depth of the alcove on each end of the grandstand structure and study the transition of the top level rail connection to the mid-level at the ends of the grandstand. That's this area here. Okay. I shouldn't have to point. My words should say enough, but hopefully they did. All right. Any other discussion on this? All right.
Yeah, we just had one thing that we did want to get and it's only because it's a recent item, and we figured we would get your feedback on it at this point.
Okay.
If we can go to the A300 sheet.
A300.
That's right. I lost my video.
You don't get to comment.
We don't get to see anymore.
Gave it away, sorry.
Thanks. And we'll have to use the overhead for this, but if you've seen, we do have a couple of tile niches. So we have some here, some recesses here, and we have them below the windows. And what we're looking at is using something similar to this. The coloration is down here, but the patterning is up here. These two elements we were looking at alternating. So we would do 1, 2, 1, 2, 1 across the top with these, let's see, it's these two patterns. In this coloration. And there's a detailed, if you look on the bottom of the sheet on 3 and 4 of that same sheet, there's a more like enlarged graphic of the layout for the tiling. And what we have is, where'd the
Pointer go? It's right here.
Oh, it's not.
So we have we have our field tile, we have a surrounding tile, and then we're looking at possibly donor recognition in the center of those pads. So that's what those panels are.
You want my first blush on it?
I want your second blush on it.
Okay. Really, just keep it simple.
And we're trying to.
That's just one commissioner, but I thought maybe the rest of the commissioners might feel the same.
Yeah, and to give you some kind of bigger feedback on that, what we're trying to do is more of a. If you look at the amount of color versus the tile shape itself, we're trying to keep that keep the background heavier than the foreground color. So we're trying to make it so it's not really densely decorative. Anyway, so that was kind of our one component that we did want to get feedback on. The other tile is the one we were looking at for the niches. So these are the patterns. The coloration is down here.
Understood.
That's
Mr. Chair.
All right. Who wants to weigh in?
School colors.
Are green and gold, right?
Yep.
I have one more comment.
There's some exquisite tile work on this building, actually.
The school building.
The school building.
Yeah.
There's a precedent for using this polychrome tile.
Sorry. Commissioner Vena?
I would hope that you use quality tile instead of slick tile.
Yeah, just as a quick response, we're looking at a porcelain product, so it's a little bit more durable, it's scratch resistant. There's a lot of things we've been trying
And
to...
something that maybe even has a
handmade look to it.
Dimensional feel to it.
Any other comments on that?
Instead of flat.
Well, I guess my comment would be too, I would like to see the colors a bit saturated, not hidden, but, be not aggressive perhaps, but, this is the Dons and this is Santa Barbara High School. And I think you should use that wonderful combination of green and gold.
Okay. So I'm not really. No, because I think this is sort of off-the-cuff review.
Yeah.
I don't think it's
I mean, it's
going to
been all
make or
that
break
time.
the project. That's my sensibility, and that's up really to the applicant and the architect what they want to do.
We appreciate your comments on that.
Okay. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Nice.
We'll keep that full-size set.
How much is it going to cost?
I've read in journals that that stuff that they use
Each donation
causes gets inhaled and causes serious trauma.
I understand.
Good to see you, Dave.
Petroleum, the kids play in it, they inhale it.
Yeah, I saw that.
There's nothing good about it. I've also seen it now in the study that I made out of soy products.
Okay, so all right, next item on the agenda is item
Actually almost
6.
edible.
This is concept review of 28 West Figueroa Street. This is the third concept review. The action may be taken.
enough money to
Can I have
prepare the soil.
a table quiet, please?
But it was a WPA project.
Mr. Grumbine, if you want to take that discussion outside, that's fine, but
45.
not here, please.
45. At the end of
Project
the war.
requires development plan
that was
approval
one of those
findings.
babies.
Project was last reviewed May 18th, 2016.
Exuberant fornication.
And I will read those comments. The motion was continued 2 weeks with the following comments.
I shouldn't have my mic on.
Good, quick, and sweet.
The mic on is right.
I shouldn't.
You guys ready for the following comments? Okay. The building has potential with its proposed design. Cortland steel for the planters is not acceptable in El Pueblo Viejo. Panelized steel in black or other dark approved color is appropriate. The color green of the eyebrow on the south elevation is not acceptable. However, the shape is acceptable. The plaster corbel should be holding a beam that in turn holds the rafters. Study examples for plaster corbels. Study more plaster at the first level on the south elevation to make it more credible. The openings on the rear elevation should relate to one another with less variety. Massing to the right of the service door needs to be increased. The motion was made by Lavoie. It was seconded by Arias. It was an 8-0-0 vote with Murray absent. All right, Mr. Oxford, please introduce yourself and give us a brief.
We're waiting for drawings.
Toughest presentation I've ever made.
Yeah, nothing to do.
Just wave your arms over here, and you'll love it.
And there's a putting green.
There's a putting green. Yeah, we have to wait for drawings. He didn't bring them.
Don't have
back.
drawings, and I don't want discussions going on, so.
Heavens, no.
How long will we get the drawings?
We don't know.
They are probably just in back here.
They're not at the printer.
No, they were in yesterday. Yes.
Good.
We're still on broadcast, you know.
I appreciate you backing me up on that stuff.
Okay, we will reconvene.
Made it seem like I was an idiot.
No, they just go for whatever.
Yeah.
But you have to pay more.
Well, it's life. You pay more in the long run.
All right, please
with
introduce
medical
yourself
care.
and give us a
Okay,
brief
I just don't-
presentation.
Yeah,
This is Tom Oxner, project architect. I think everyone here is familiar with the project. I'll dive right into the response to the items. Let's see, there was, I went and, we'll start with the large items first. I think the biggest item was really the increasing the mass on the face of the elevations to establish more punched openings rather than just the openings themselves. So we'll start at the south elevation. What I've done here is to
The microphone too.
what I've done is to reduce the width of the windows and create larger wall spaces on either side and around the openings. And I don't have the color version here, but what we're doing is going to a terracotta color for the unibrow, we'll call it. And then going with, of course, the black iron, the charcoal iron for the faces of the planters.
Okay.
And the corbels on the upper roof, I'm going to jump to a section because we're on the front facade. So if you go to the last page, I looked at the corbels and created a unity of the forms here in the front facade and the rear facade, looking at some of the corbel shapes, especially around the 1300 block of State Street, as well as the Arlington's single eyebrow with the shape of the edge and conformed my eyebrow to match that. Express the wood beam across that spans between the corbels, both in the front and the back, and then let the rafter tails sit on top of that, with the same on the rear elevation. Let's see, and then match the corbel at the eyebrow here with that in similar fashion. It's a little different, but slightly different to the upper overhang corbels. So if we go to the elevations, again, the south elevation, we can see that that we've got a slightly shorter corbel. So those have been adjusted, and the ironwork has been embellished, and then I simplified the opening, and this arched opening is then carried around to the rear elevation. I know there was a comment to simplify those, so there's the matching opening on the rear elevation. This is just a simple wood plank door on the service door.
More dimension here.
And right, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, these have been widened up. I looked at the trash requirements and the space requirements, and I've increased the massing there. But really, it's the same thing. It's been brought up on Revit now, so it's all doable. It all works. Let's see. Is there anything else? I think that's it.
Do you have any color samples?
You know, I don't. I ran out of time to print off the color, but it's basically a white building with a charcoal ironwork, and we've got the terracotta now replacing the green for that eyebrow on the front.
Okay. I will open public comment. I don't have any speaker slips, so I'll close it and ask the commission if they have any questions. Anyone on the commission have any question?
No.
How about any comment from a commissioner? Any comment?
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Commissioner Mahan.
Yeah, the corbels on the front, I don't...
Do you want to see the detail or the elevation?
Yeah, the detail. It would seem to me like the reason for the corbels is because the beam or the girder, or whatever you want to call that major thing would be out somewhere here, down a little bit, so that the rafters would come on top of it, and the corbel would hold that beam out there, which would span across the front. Putting the beam right up against the wall, it seems to me is, there's no need for the corbel, and the corbel should be down, and the beam should be out, and the rafters then should sit on top of the beam.
Can I explain the evolution of that corbel on this building?
All right, since we have that comment and question.
Okay, great. Let me just explain. So basically, we've got a property line to property line building, and in your guidelines themselves, it shows a situation that's very similar to treating an overhang up against a corbel condition like this. And it seems to work well. I've seen this situation used. Originally, the purpose of the corbel is to protect the side of the overhang as it comes out against the property line. It gives it the fire rating that it needs. So it got repeated to the other side, and it seemed to create a nice composition. There were rafters that extend out, and there was a comment, which I agreed with, that the corbels are, could be perceived as being there to support a wood beam. Really, they're there to provide an extended parapet to protect a wood overhang on a property line. So I understand the comment, and I've got this modeled in 3D and did look at the way that the wood beam comes up against the building. I pulled the wood beam out, and it created an awkward shadow line between that beam and the building itself. So I think I understand the concern. I think it's a good concern. And I do think with the wood beam continuing all the way across, it does give some unity and extends the wood character of the wood rafters up there. But if it's brought forward, we can certainly do that. It looks heavy. I tried bringing it out so that it was more than 6 inches, so it came out, maybe splitting the distance of the overhang itself, which is over 2 feet. And it just seemed a little heavy. So I thought pushing it up against the building was a balance to that.
Could it be more decorative somehow? Curved or?
Sure.
I don't know.
But the beam,
You mean the beam of the
Let's see a profile of it. So this is it. There's a 6-inch width across the.
So the
it's-
corbel's
it's
decorative.
6 inches across the.
What are you referring to more curved?
Well,
The corbel or
instead of the corbel, instead of it just coming out as a beam, curve it up.
It does.
I don't know. No?
I think the corbel, the shape of the corbel is fine.
It's where the beam sits in relationship to the corbel.
Oh.
Hey, I don't see where the rafters.
Okay,
I don't see
okay.
where
The rafter's not. The rafter looks just like this.
I see.
So
Sorry.
there's one with the rafter. That rafter I didn't show
you
it.
see that's this beam, which is supposed to be supporting those rafters, should be down, and the rafter should be sitting on top of the beam, and the corbel then supports the beam.
Well, there could be more space from the bottom of the rafter. It's notched in there, but yeah, that could be extended down lower.
Would the public see that? I mean, would we see that? Yeah?
Yeah, you look up into
You
it.
see
Okay.
that detail.
All right.
If you do drop that beam a bit and then notch it, you can still infill in between the rafters so that
Yes.
and so you don't
Have that shadow.
yeah.
Yeah, it's just it's.
Okay. Any other comments?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I think it's a really nice looking building. It's a really nice looking building, and he's certainly satisfied our concerns.
Would somebody like to make a motion?
I agree. I want to have one more comment.
Okay, comment.
I think in our minutes there was something said about that the metal planter should be segmented or
Panelized
panelized. Yeah,
steel in black or other dark approved.
I don't see that. It just looks like there's just a plain sheet of iron there. The panelized means that they would be
seamed,
paneled,
or you put a border around it like that.
right.
I could do that, and that's not how I understood that comment. But
Panelized means that it's like a stile and rail.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Box and rail.
I can do that.
I think it's a very nice building.
Any other comments?
I like the back, how the back has evolved, and it's beginning to look as good as the front, so. And I think
Very
that's
well done.
important in public space too, so.
So I think the only
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
I'd make a motion for project design approval with the revised drawings to come back to the consent calendar.
Second.
With the following conditions: that the metal planters be a box and panel expressed, and that the corbels support a beam which supports
the
rafters.
And include color.
Second.
Oh, and include the color in
the color palette.
The color palette, the color samples.
I'm sorry, could I have clarification on that last item about the
rafter?
Yeah.
And the corbels?
Yes, please. Thank
He's going to provide it for you.
Mr. Corbin should be holding the beam ready to remove the rafters.
We're providing a drawing.
That's even better.
Well, sometimes it's the only way. Can you draw a little bit faster?
You can have that. So that you may have to drop the corbel to make it credible.
So pull the beam out to the very end.
To within about 12 inches of the end.
Well, not clear to the end.
City TV, could you zoom in?
Usually about 12 inches out
So,
from the end.
so if I have the beam that still sits in, is that? I mean,
It doesn't need to be a structural beam.
Right, but the rafter, the shape of the rafter. The only thing I'm concerned about is
You may have to change the shape of the rafter.
so the rafter
It starts to taper.
There's the rafter right there.
There's the rafter tail.
And the beam needs to be like right in here, like that.
And so the corbel needs to
and
be
then
bigger
the corbel needs to support needs to support that.
But I also need to extend the corbel out to this point so I can.
That's
meet
fine.
the fire separation.
That's fine. Sort of the function of it is. We understand the function of it. It's really a firewall.
Okay.
Okay. So we're taking this set. So do you have that?
Yeah.
You understand that?
I understand that.
Okay. Yes.
That the colors be provided, that's the easy one.
Color board, okay.
Be provided. Okay. And that the metal planters are a box and panel.
Are a
Box and panel design.
Second.
So we had a motion by Lavoie and a second by Drury. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained?
Ordered.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you very
We
much.
are adjourned.
You.
Pardon? Oh, we're not adjourned. This decision is appealable to the City Council within 10 days of today's date. Now we are adjourned. That's for you.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.